Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am Alexis. I am a blind author, content creator, and freelancer, and my pronouns are they, them. Welcome to a massive video that took me weeks to edit. This is the best intro I have for you. Welcome to the video that took me weeks to edit. I have created long videos in this channel before. This, I'm pretty sure, being my longest, but it didn't take me this long before. But I chose to edit this during my semester, and I'm very busy, and I just got to editing this, and I just finished it today as I am recording this. I recorded this all the way back in May, the bulk of the video, with the exception of this part and the outro. I recorded this all the way back in May, and I have a lot to say. So as you can see from the title, these are my thoughts on Jenna Moreci's top 10 YA, top 10 worst YA fiction tropes. I have a disclaimer for this video, and that is the following. These are my opinions based on the content that Moreci has available for public consumption. This is not about her as a person. I don't care about that. This is about the content that she has there. I myself am familiar with Moreci's content. I have watched her videos before. I also join her writing sprints because I like them. I like writing sprints generally. I've asked questions in the sprints before. I've gotten at least some of my questions answered, which has been great for me because it has helped my research on certain things I've been trying to do. So I've gotten my questions answered that way, and I do what I can. Now, please, again, remember, this is I'm familiar with this, so this is not about her. These are just my opinions based on everything said. So if you, in the comments, I would like your opinion on the tropes, especially if you make it through this long video. I would like your opinion on the tropes mentioned and any of your opinions on YA, because I have used this to, as a jumping off point for a conversation in young adult and just my thoughts generally. I would love your opinion on this. However, if in my comments I see a disparaging comment about Jenna as a person, I will delete the comment and I will block you. I would not appreciate that in my comment section. So please keep your opinions to the tropes and the videos, but do not have any disparaging comments on Jenna Moreci. And I am putting this disclaimer up front because I at least I try not to make my opinions about people. I try to keep it to their content or their work in my channel. So I do not want to foster an audience where there may be there will be any kind of hate comments toward people. I would not like that. So I'm trying to put this in just up front for you. I just do me a favor and don't have any disparaging comments or any kind of hate comments on Moreci as a person. I do not appreciate it. Again, I will block and delete the comment. I will block you and delete the comment. So that is my disclaimer. And a couple of really short housekeeping things. It is release month for me. Daughter of Death is about to be released. It'll be on December 26, 2023. Or maybe, no, because I plan to post this before release date. So yeah, it'll be released then. So if you're interested in the book, check out my description for the links. And if you want to get it before, you can pre-order in a bunch of the retailers, or you can get it beforehand through Smashwords, or through, because it's a pre-sale until 26, or you can get it directly through my shop. And speaking of Smashwords, there is currently a sale going on there is currently a sale, or there will be a sale by the time you're watching this, from December 15th all the way up to January 1st. This is the end of the year sale for Smashwords. If you would like to get my book for free during those weeks, that is the best place to get it. So, yep, there's a sale. I will make sure to post in the community section when I can, but please note there's a sale if you want to get the book for free. That way. Other thing, if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. Also, go to my website and subscribe to my blog. That way you can get some of my written content. I'm currently posting early drafts, chapters of my first draft of The Rightful Bride, so you can check that out as well. And one last thing, I will put this in the pinned comment, but Bookshare is currently running a fundraiser where they're raising $200,000 to extend Bookshare's access to children in India. You can find more information in the linked comment, in the pinned comment. So check that out. I will, if you can support, I would encourage you to do so. And I don't just mean monetarily, I mean just like also sharing the word. I would encourage you to do so. Bookshare is an organization that has done a lot for me. It's given me access to books since I was 13, and I would like to offer that access to as many people as possible. Good reminder, by the way, my book on release day will be on Bookshare. So if you're not able to get it for whatever reason, you can get it through Bookshare if you are a member. And with that, on to the video, everybody. So I'm finally doing it. I am deciding to finally react to writing advice. I have tried to do this before, but then I ended up deleting it because I don't think I liked what I had, the way I reacted to it. But now I'm going to try again. And I'm going to start with a blog post by Jenna Moreci called 10 Worst Young Adult Tropes in Fiction. She does a lot of these trope talk videos and a lot of writing advice stuff on YouTube. I am very familiar with her content. So that is my very first disclaimer. I am very familiar with her content. I know the way that she gives advice, and while I disagree with a lot of the advice she, not a lot of the advice, but like while I disagree with the way she formats some of her advice, and most of it does not work for me. I do think some of her advice can be very useful. I will say that if you do watch her videos, she usually gives her advice in a very sarcastic way. And that's what I find kind of interesting. Like, I like her personality, but also her advice is more geared to plotters, not very geared to discovery writing, which is not surprising considering that most of the writing advice I am familiar with is geared toward plotters more than discovery writers. So this is actually not a surprise at all. This, in any case, is normal. So just take that with a grain of salt. And also, my second disclaimer is this. General writing advice can be good, but as an author, be careful of all, or as a writer and author, whatever, be careful with any advice that you receive and that you choose, that is given to you in general. Writing advice is very much subjective. Writing itself is subjective, and reading is subjective. We're going to be talking about tropes here, but everything here is going to be subjective to the to Moreci, and anything I say in response is going to be subjective to me. Nothing is objectively true in any case, I think. So take any advice that I may even give you here with a grain of salt, because I'm only one I'm only one author. Moreci is one author, and you as an author and as an aspiring writer or writer of any kind are also one person, one writer, one author. So take what advice you can get and leave the rest, and also just know that whatever we say, whatever I say in this video is subjective to me. So that is the one thing. Those are the main two disclaimers I wanted to give. So as I said, am an author. I have published one book. I don't know when this video is going to be coming out. So by the time this video is out, the book is either going to be out or still in pre-order. If anything, the release date is December 26, 2023. And it is my debut. So I am a new author of sorts. I've been writing for years, however, but I am a newly published author. It will be a debut fantasy short story called Daughter of Death. It is the first in a series called Child of Death, which follows Vivian, who's 8, and she's a half deity, and she is discovered in the mortal realm, and now her family has to adjust to this new change, right? So that is my premise for my series. It currently, besides the book, this is the one book is out, but I currently have written 4 books on it, and I think I will leave it as a quartet. I plan for it to be a prequel to maybe some crossover series I've been working on for some time, so it'll be fun. But this is kind of where this is my experience with publishing in general. But besides being an author and someone who has written for years, I am also a reader. Particularly, I have been gravitating more toward adult lately, but I definitely started off with fairy tales and young adult books. Those are kind of my big the genres I started out with, and I still read YA. I read it pretty much as often as I can. As often as I can find a YA trope that's interesting to me, I will read it. If I find a YA story that's just like they're like, oh, that's interesting, I will read it. There are authors I really like who specifically write YA. So I am someone who reads a lot of young adult fiction and rather enjoys it. I specifically like young adult fantasy the most, but I will read other fiction as well too. So I do like YA as a category or genre, however you want to call it, but technically it is a category. I do enjoy it. So I'm very curious to see what Moreci has to say are the worst tropes in young adult fiction. Now, the worst young adult tropes in fiction. Now, I will say, my aim for this video is to give my thoughts on things and just give any advice that I can if I have any. I don't particularly write young adult. I have considered doing so, but I have stayed in the adult. I mark my books as adult because it gives me a little bit more freedom. However, the landscape of YA seems to be changing. So my goal is to use this video as a hopefully bigger conversation on young adult literature and in general, just give my thoughts on young adult literature as a writer as well as a reader. So if you are interested in that, stay tuned for the video because I will be talking about a lot of things. Also, this video does allow me to respond to a video that I saw where someone was talking about young adult fiction and how YA is basically a subgenre of romance. Something I do disagree with, and I am hoping to talk about throughout this video. I don't know the full. I did watch this video, the original video by Jenna, but I can't remember the full context of every tip. So hopefully I get to talk about it, and that's kind of my aim. I think I will hopefully give my thoughts through. I may give my final thoughts in the end, but the landscape for young adult has changed since I was a teenager. I started reading young adult when I was 14 years old, and my experience with young adult has shifted as my reading has. And my first experience with young adult was a book called Someone to Love Me, and I think the book was published. No, I know the book was published somewhere in the early 2000s. So my first experience with young adult was older YA, and then eventually shifted to what YA is now and the different views I think I find in young adult. So let's start by reading her intro, And then from there, I guess we'll see if I can keep with the goals I originally planned for this video. So wish me luck, because I think this is going to get very interesting. Quick update, Moreci is currently, as of recording, on a hiatus from posting videos on YouTube. It looks like she still has her blog going on, but the videos, she's currently on a hiatus due to personal things, which I will not discuss in this video. She did make a video talking about it, but right now you can still find her on YouTube, but she is doing live streams instead, where she is answering questions, as well as doing live writing sprints, which I do join here and there when I can, because currently I have school, so I have to be Monday nights I am exhausted and sometimes don't want to write very much, so I only write for an hour to go to sleep around 9, and I make it through like one sprint maybe. And then Wednesday nights I have to definitely be in bed early because I have class on Thursday, so I do my best to join. And another thing, I'm pretty sure I will talk about this in the video, but young adult as a category is just is a bit, it could be in publishing, it could be a bit confusing due to the way that publishers, especially traditional publishers, may, from what I've seen, I don't know about self-published authors, but I know that traditional publishers may make the choice to put something in YA though it is not, and the characters don't fit the age range of YA, which is 13 to 18, specifically teens. Another thing to note is I have changed my debut book marking to YA, because I was able to receive a second opinion from when I donated to Bookshare. It does not contain adult content, so I felt comfortable. I felt comfortable putting it in general audience, and in the audiobook putting it so that 16 and 17-year-olds can read it. I just wanted to mention that because I did do that, make that change. The other thing to note here too is that I still, however, write my books by default as adult. I do consider my books adult as I am writing, so I can have that freedom. If things change during editing, that's perfectly fine. But by default, I do consider my books adult. So anyway, back to the video. Okay, so here's her intro. Hello, everybody. Although she writes it with a lot of different O's, so if you hear her talking, she usually extends her like hello, which is like hello, everybody. So I'm back again for another Tropes video. By the way, I will say I love her trope videos. Her trope videos are really fun. But today we're doing things a little differently. Instead of breaking down the worst tropes in a genre, I am going to break down the worst tropes in a category of fiction. And that category is young adult fiction. I want to say that young adult fiction is full of familiar tropes, and it's very specific to like the genre. There are some tropes that are very specific to the genre that, like, if you are someone who consumes YA regularly, you're going to be like, oh yeah, this is young adults. Some of those tropes have shifted as well to adult too, like the Masquerade Ball, which we're going to talk about I think later, but there a lot of things that there are things that I automatically push to YA. One of them is love triangles, and then in general romance. There are very few young adult books that I've read, I think, especially in fantasy, where there is no love triangle. And usually it's not done very effectively, if I'm being honest. So, you know, I don't love it because it gives love triangles a bad name, and I like love triangles. If you do like love triangles and would like to see a good one, particularly in YA, I would like to recommend one for you, and that is Fruits Basket. Fruits Basket is both a manga and an anime. The anime specifically has two versions. There is the like 2001, I think, 2001 or 2002 anime, and then it actually may have been 2003. I actually just can't remember the exact dates. But it is an early 2000s anime, or there is the reboot, which started in 2019 and is currently at 3 seasons. But the basic premise of Fruits Basket is that our main character, Toru, is living in a tent because her grandfather's house is being renovated and she doesn't want to bother him or her friends, and she's living in a tent in this property. However, she kind of ends up losing that during a I think it's like a landslide, as well as other things that were in that tent. And she ends up moving into the Soma house, and and Yuki Soma specifically goes to school with her, and eventually so will the others. But basically, she moves in there and eventually discovers that the Soma family is under a curse. And what ends up happening is that when they are hugged by the opposite sex, they turn into one of the Chinese zodiac animals. And from there, it kind of ensues into like a slice of life anime that has a beautiful love triangle, and it also has friendship and everything in between. And it shows you, like, literally the best way to make a love triangle happen. The key to making a good love triangle happen is for both love interests to have chemistry with the person who's in between. And so, yeah, if you want to consume a very good love triangle, watch Fruits Basket, the anime, or read the manga. Young adult fiction, or YA fiction, is fiction written for teenagers. All right, so let's talk about this specifically. This is one of the ways I think I can start this conversation. So yes, originally young adult fiction is fiction written for teenagers. However, it has shifted slightly, where now there are two camps of YA that I have seen and in my reading, and also have heard of from other people who have reviewed young adult. Which is where I think there is confusion in certain ways, and where I think the person whose video I watched was also confused, which is valid considering that. However, I do want to say that reader expectations do change. So the categories and genres should change with those expectations. So the YA landscape as it is right now that I've read is you have, I guess you can say, lower YA. I'm going to call them lower and higher YA. So lower YA is specifically stories that do have teenage characters, and they focus on their issues and sometimes even hard topics, but they are not explicit in nature, specifically when it comes to things like sex. However, at least not on the page. There can be sex, but it's not explicit on the page. But then there is YA that is very explicit with sex scenes and stuff like that. I think that is the main thing. And sometimes there are books as well that are marked young adult, and the characters might be a little bit older, and instead they kind of fit into the new adult, because young adult is supposed to be ages, I would say 13 to 18 or 15 to 19, whichever one to do. And then there is new adult, which is ages 18 to 25. The issue with this is that there is a bit of at least in my opinion, there is a bit of a blur between young adult and new adult, where even teenagers can pick it up, because it's technically still closer to that range. So because there is a bit of a blur, you can have an 18-year-old in a young adult and make it either lower or higher in the level of explicitness in the book. So that is kind of what I have seen in young adult. And then there is, of course, the reviewing side of young adult, where you will find people who think that young adult is great and should not be dismissed as a category of literature, like me, I think young adult is one of the best categories. But I read young adult, middle grade, and adult. I like all of them. And I also enjoy watching those stories in visual media. I specifically love more, I watch more children's shows than anything else, but actually, no, that's wrong. I watch more adult and children's shows, and then young adult kind of comes in the middle. But I watch those things in stories, and I read middle grade, young adult, and adult whenever I can find them. So I am someone who does not believe any genre should be dismissed. However, you also get the reviewers who do dismiss young adult. And that, I think, is where also part of the problem does lie. So you will have reviewers, for example, who have reviewed things like Light Lark and are kind of like, because the way Light Lark is written, they're like, yeah, but it's also young adult, so it is expected for it to be written like this, or I don't expect much from this. But why not? Why don't you expect it to be written that way? So at the same time, you have this, I think the reason is I don't expect it to be written like this is because it's written for teens. But at the same time, if you as a reviewer if you're in the second view that I have presented, where it's like, I don't think I kind of expect it to be written like this because it's written for teens. At the same time, you are also in a way talking down to teenagers, because you basically are not expecting media specifically that targets them to be good. And you are also, at least in my opinion, you are saying that teenagers get really, really bad media, and probably are going to continue to do so. And it also, to me, shows that the authors, some of the, not the authors, but some of the reviewers dismiss it because it's just made for teens. And because it's made for teens, it's dismissed as either not well written, or just not good enough. And I don't think that's okay, because at the end of the day, it does discourage teenagers from, it could, not that it does, but I don't know if it does, but in my opinion it would, but it could potentially discourage teenagers from reading. We want people to love books, right? We don't want to discourage readers. And I do think that this attitude of young adult not being the best because it's written for teens is discouraging. But at the same time, young adult is shifting. So it's almost like you don't know, I guess, what camp you would be in, like what camp YA is in. For my thought, I will hopefully give you some of my thoughts later in the video, but I do have some thoughts on in general, what the camps, how I feel about young adult as it is right now. But I'll give them to you. I'll probably either give them to you at the end of the video, or I'll give it to you throughout the video. But this is kind of where I stand. This is where young adult currently, this is the landscape that I have seen of young adult as a reader and as a reviewer of young adult books and books in general. So let me know, what do you think of this? Is this what you're seeing too, or are you seeing other things, or is there something else maybe that I didn't mention? If I didn't, editing me will tell you if there's anything I forgot to mention or clear anything up I just didn't, hopefully. To be clear, I'm not saying necessarily that Moreci dismisses the YA category. However, taking a brief look at her, at the tropes list again that we will be discussing in this video, and I remember mentioning this later, but it's worth mentioning. Taking a look at these tropes, she does kind of, she is very dismissive of what teens like to read, at least in the way that the tropes are presented, and so on and so forth. She calls these the 10 worst YA tropes, so she's very dismissive of them generally. Yeah, we'll get into it. I should also say that I am that some of the tropes mentioned are also very early 2000. Some of them specifically, at least like it's at least the first three. At least the very first three are very early 2000s YA, particularly Twilight. Okay. Written for okay, sorry, I'm looking for okay. Obviously, people of any age can read whatever books they want to read, but YA fiction was written with a teenage audience in mind. I can understand that. It was originally written for a teenage audience in mind, and it can still be that. I think the difference is that now teenagers are very different from what they used to be, and there is more expectation for from them to get better media, or there might be. I don't know many teenagers that read books, so I don't know. But also, at least I, as a 23-year-old adult who enjoys young adult fiction, would have higher expectations for better media for teens to consume. So I think that the teenagers that it originally started out with, well, one, they're adults now, but two, is not the same anymore, and audience expectation changes, so category and genre expectations should too. At the end of the day, the only reason that genre and category expectations exist is because of audiences, right? So, for example, there are like two big conventions in romance, right? It is the meet cute, and then there is the happily ever after / happy for now. And those are like the two genre conventions. Those are the things that your readers expect. But come tomorrow, if your readers expect something else from romance, then the romance genre would probably evolve and change with those expectations. So at the time when I think that YA is in a way shifting with its audience, but I think the transition is still ongoing because, you know, reader tastes because readers are still changing, and readers' tastes change, and because of that, I think YA is still changing. Okay. I'll admit I was a little hesitant to cover this because YA fans, particularly adult YA fans, can be very defensive about this topic. I can imagine why, actually. I personally am very defensive about YA because it is something I still read to this day, but also it is kind of what led me, or one of the things that lead me to read, you know? So I can see why fans would be defensive about it. But let's see what she says here. How dare you attack YA? You can pry these teen adventures out of my cold, dead hands. So I don't think fans react that way. But again, here is some of Moreci's sarcasm in her sarcastic trademark, which, you know, we can enjoy, right? I think it can be enjoyed, and it is a way to look at like that. I guess maybe either she sees them or it is a way to illustrate how they might react, because I do like teen adventures. Teen adventures are fun. I love YA, which is why I'm covering this. So so I suppose she can say that, you know, yes, fans, especially adult fans, can be very defensive, but again, young adult audiences and in general the teens that they were meant to be written for have changed. So and also with the internet, fans now have a legitimate way to express their feelings on how people view the things that they read, which can be a good and a bad thing, but that's for another video. But I cover the worst tropes of all kinds of books. I've got like 30 videos about them already. Oh, I was about to say EM. Okay, about them already. And some of my most popular worst tropes videos are about genres that I love to read and write in. That's good. That means it's your turn, YA. I'm coming for you. So if you read this part of it does, well, she is sarcastic. I think she's being very sarcastic. I don't think she's attacking the young adult category. It can come off as a little like an attack if you are looking at it. But if you're new and you're not familiar with her content. But this is kind of how she talks. Like, she's just super sarcastic, and it just sounds like this. It's a very interesting way to lead the videos. And also, if you do watch Moreci videos, they're like 10, no, to the majority are like 10 to 20 minutes long. So yeah, so that's the thing. It does come off that way, but I don't think she's attacking the category. I think she's just being really sarcastic, which makes sense considering her sarcasm trademark. I do want to say that you kind of only gain this knowledge that she is being really sarcastic when she says certain things after watching her content for some time. You tend to realize how sarcastic she is when you spend time like delving into her 10-minute videos and even her live streams and stuff like that. You probably wouldn't realize that right away unless she outright tells you in the beginning of the video. There are some videos that I can remember, and a couple months ago I remember watching, I think maybe a little bit more, like a year. I don't remember in the time, but I remember watching videos where she specifically says, by the way, this stuff is sarcastic. But unless you watch her content or she tells you, it does take it does take some time to kind of just like it does take some time to realize that she's just being sarcastic. So keep that in mind for when, I guess, if you choose to like watch her content or even explore it. This is kind of how I feel about it anyway. This is not a critique against her. This is just my general opinion on the content and how it might be viewed. Okay, so I am skipping a little bit of the blog post. She tells us that this was requested by a patron who wanted to get more videos on tropes. And it says on tropes, to see more trope videos. And it says here specifically tropes about teenage characters, and that's what we're talking about today. Now, and here's what she has here now. Now, in case you haven't noticed, I myself am not a teenager, which means YA books were not written with me in mind, but that doesn't matter because I make these posts for fun. This shit ain't serious. We're here for a laugh. So, wait, let me read the rest of this. With that said, I am breaking down the 10 worst young adult tropes in my humble but completely correct opinion. Okay, and it says here, please remember this was Please remember this is just my perspective and I reserve the right to change my mind, but let's be real, this disclaimer isn't going to prevent anyone from getting irrationally pissed. Okay, so as she said, YA wasn't written with her in mind. It was written with a teenager in mind. But also, she's right, though. It doesn't matter whether something is intended for you or not. It doesn't matter that something has a different audience. What does matter is how you cover it and how you review it. So one of the things that I know I've noticed a lot, especially when I watch reviewers, is that depending on the audience, their review style is differently, and their expectations either are a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So if it's adult, they have a lot of higher expectations than they would if it is young adult, or if it's children's, middle grade, and so on. For children's fiction, I actually understand, because there are ways, I think, to deliver things, to deliver information to children than there would be to teenagers and adults. However, I personally, when I review, I keep the same expectations pretty much for everything, despite the audience, because at the same time, you do have to consider audience, I think, in your reviews and in your writing, but at the same time, you also, at least in my opinion, you don't want to talk down to your audience. You really don't. It will make your audience feel, it could, in my opinion it will, but we don't want to make our audience feel stupid. We want to make our audience, we want to shoot for the intelligent audience that we know we have. Teenagers and children are a lot more intelligent than people give them credit for, and because of that, we want to give them good media. We don't want to give them bad media. And the same thing can be said for YA fiction. So we want to give them YA. We have to give them good YA. We don't want to give them bad ones. And because of that, that's why I think she's right in the fact that it doesn't matter whether you are an adult covering teenage media or not, even though it's not written for you. What matters is how you cover it and what you can gain from it, but also what you have to say about it, and whether you cover it in a way that isn't dismissive. And I honestly find that there are some reviewers who do cover it in a very dismissive way, and others who kind of are just really into YA. So they cover it in a way that works, and that actually makes young adult sound as intelligent as it is. So you have both camps, and it depends on what reviewers you watch, truth be told. Okay, so her first trope is, he's so dark and mysterious. So you'll notice, by the way, as we cover the tropes that she has, is that there are no actual trope names necessarily. So say that you're covering romance tropes, and it's top 5 lists of my favorite romance tropes, and you go friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, fake dating, friends with, pregnancy romance, or work romance. Say that you'll notice that they don't really have names for the tropes. Instead, what she does in her tropes is she gives a specific line that describes the trope, which I think can work a little bit better in certain areas, but you will notice that there are no names in these tropes. Instead, we have the line that kind of describes the trope itself as best as, I guess, as she can, which again can be pretty helpful. But also, I will say that it would probably be useful to name the tropes as well. That way, if writers come to you, you can give a name for the tropes. I don't know what name this trope would be, if I'm being honest. I know where this trope could be from, and I'm going to talk about it later when she gives her opinion about this trope, and how and where I saw it and how it can be done, I guess. So yeah, let's read her opinion and find out. Also, a lot of the things in this list aren't really tropes. They're more like cliches. So at least for me, I tend to identify cliches and tropes differently. A trope is kind of like a story frame, and that you can use to like build your story around, while a cliche is more like, you know, stuff that you see pretty often in stories. So for example, sometimes in certain anime there will be a beach episode. That is a kind of cliche. There is the one that's just like in rom-coms you'll see the one where it's like the woman or the man will like go to the airport to, or like the person will go to the airport to like before the plane and go to the terminal like to say I love you. I mean, that to me is a cliche, not a trope. So I'd argue that a lot of the stuff she has issues with are not tropes but cliches. Okay. Or is he just a fucking loser? I love a mysterious man as much as the next guy. Actually, no, I don't. Tell me your truth or get the fuck out. But the dark and mysterious angle doesn't translate super well when it comes to teenagers. Okay, I don't know if that's necessarily true. So I guess we're gonna start here. So where I read the dark and mysterious guy is, unsurprisingly, Twilight. I say unsurprisingly, but actually no, it totally makes sense. If you have read Twilight, I think you know that this makes sense. Edward is in the beginning of Twilight. Spoilers, by the way, if you haven't read it. I should have just said that before. In the beginning of Twilight, Edward is a very mysterious guy, which Bella is trying to figure out. So she does whatever she can to kind of figure out this who this person is, while he's telling her to stay away from him, and does everything he can to stay away from her. And then eventually, though, he does start talking, and she does realize he's a vampire, and he tells her wonderful lines like, you are my own personal brand of heroin, and also reveals wonderful things like, every night I have watched you sleep. That's what we all want, ladies. So now that is where I saw it the first time. I probably have seen it before, and again after that, and I am totally forgetting. But I haven't read the rest of her part here, but I do have to disagree here with Moreci, because I do think it can translate well to teenagers, especially the way that they're especially they're like the impulsive nature that can happen, and how, like, if they're very impulsive as a character, or if they're very curious as a character, it can translate. But I think you need to write it in a way that works with the character that they are. So if you write a very intelligent teenager, but maybe add that they are really they're very curious, so they are impulsive in certain areas, then yes, the dark and mysterious guy aspect, I think, can work. Or if you write a teenager who just happens to be just in general, like, super curious and impulsive, and it's just like, you can add her to be intelligent if you want, but if you don't want to write, like, if you want to write her more just like that, you can. Or if you want to do another one that I think can work for this is the Belle kind of teenager, as I'm gonna call her the Belle teenager. So the Belle teenager, I hope you have guessed, this is a reference to Beauty and the Beast, where Belle gets, she ends up trading places with her dad, and the Beast is telling her you can go anywhere in the palace except this area, and when she touches the rose, he gets mad at her, but she is an intelligent character who is in general very curious about him as a person, and she wants to know what's happening and everything. So you can write it in that kind of situation if you're doing it. If you give, basically, I think what I'm trying to say, and I haven't been able to put my point, is if you're writing a character who is interested in the mysterious dark guy, you need to give her a reason to be interested in that. And the two ways to do that is A, have her character be a certain way that would push her to investigate, and then combine it with B, give the guy a reason to be dark and mysterious. In a weird way, I think Stephenie Meyer did it almost correctly. Because I think that the way that Stephenie Meyer did it is Bella doesn't feel like she fits in. She has a hard time belonging. So the fact that she's an outsider, and something that feels different to something that seems different would automatically draw her attention. So I think it was done kind of okay. I think that it could have been done better, but the reason it wasn't is because Bella is more of a blank slate, meant for you as the reader to kind of fill in the blanks. So it could have been done better, but it was not. So let's continue with this tip and what else she has to say. I want to see if maybe she can change my mind, and we can, and if there's something I can agree with. Also, before we move on, this trope could or this cliche, if you will, or character archetype, this feels more like a character archetype than cliche, but this character archetype could actually work very well for the power fantasy, both adult and teen, but since we're going to focus on teens, let's just say for the teen power fantasy, where it's kind of like, it's that fantasy that's like, a woman through no effort of her own, or a girl in this case, through no effort of her own, kind of garners the attention of a lot of boys, particularly the most popular and even the more mysterious boy, who literally has no reason to pay attention to her, but still does. And because of that, it becomes it kind of works really, really well, because he is dark and mysterious, but for some reason he falls for her. So it makes it so that you can kind of like see where like the power fantasy aspect, like, so it really does work. And I can actually kind of see why teenagers would actually really be interested in reading it, considering they have a lot of times either they have or they feel like they have so little control over their lives. Like this trope is actually this character archetype is very escapist in nature. It's very interesting to look at it that way. I don't know what high school you went to, but the edgy dudes who wore mostly black and always went out at night were drug dealers. They barely graduated, and they were regularly found high bagging groceries at their after school jobs. And I know your dark mysterious character is probably just a fallen angel or a vampire who's actually 1,000 years old. But if that's the case, why the hell is he in high school? You couldn't pay me to return to that hellhole, but these guys are going back there willingly. I'm just saying, if he's edgy, mysterious, and 16, he probably likes to melt stuff and dislikes stuff that doesn't melt. Okay, so she has not changed my mind. Instead, it feels like a stereotype. Like, it feels like she might be stereotyping teenagers here. It doesn't feel like... Here's the thing. Reading it and watching it, I can tell you this. It doesn't feel like it comes off this specific trope that she's describing and she's giving her opinion come off. It doesn't feel like she's saying this in good faith. The thing with tropes is that no trope is bad. I have said it before and I'll say it again. No trope is bad. The only bad thing is execution. Tropes are wonderful tools. There are wonderful frameworks to write your story around. But if you don't necessarily execute them in the best way you can, then they become trope. The trope becomes kind of irritating. But tropes themselves are not bad. Neither are character archetypes or cliches. I actually really like cliches. I very much enjoy tropes in general. I enjoy character archetypes. They are really wonderful tools. So when she is talking about this, it feels like she is being dismissive, and it doesn't come off as someone in good faith, like who's saying this in good faith. And also, it dismisses the fact that usually, or at least in the way I have read dark, mysterious, edgy teenagers, is I've read them specifically in things like Twilight, which can be considered... Oh, and in Lightlark, I forgot. Lightlark has a dark, mysterious dude. Oh my god. See, I knew I've seen it before and I totally forgot. So things like Twilight and Lightlark are power fantasies. They are teen power fantasies. And the point of things like this is to make teenagers feel powerful and to basically write a teenager for other teenagers to I guess feel like, because this is kind of like, or like to be to vicariously live through to a life that they don't have. It's this whole thing, I guess. Like, it's more about power fantasies. It's very much a power fantasy. And I think, again, the other reason I call it a stereotype here is because she does talk about those who went out at night and were in black, in her high school were drug dealers, and they barely graduated, and they were found high bagging groceries at their after school job. And I don't like the way this kind of stereotypes teenagers. I think it just comes off as someone who's saying things in bad faith. Again, no teenager is the same. No person is the same. So it comes off in bad faith. And of course, she does mention that she knows that the Dark Mysterious character is a fallen angel or a vampire who's usually older than the main character and who is willingly going back to high school. And so the other thing that I was saying too about power fantasies is, they're very fun and sometimes they can be dismissed. So it is dismissing the fact that these usually are power fantasies. And in a way, romance is power fantasy. And sometimes you just want to read a power fantasy. And I think that's where the dark, mysterious, handsome, mysterious guy does translate well to teenagers, when it is a power fantasy. And that is what Twilight and Lightlark are. So it does dismiss that, and it also dismisses, I think, the person who generally just wears black and who's just a bit darker because, I think. Like, it feels dismissive. This trope feels dismissive. I, for one, like I said, I think that the dark and mysterious trope can go well with teenagers. Now, I do want to talk about her mention of the older older person, like older vampire or fallen angel aspect, because my introduction to that was also, unsurprisingly, Twilight, because Edward was 108 years old and dating a 17-year-old. Because that's good. Oh my god, listen, I know that the ages of consent vary here and there. I think here where I live it's like 17, but you as an adult should know better. Now, there is a problem. There is a problematic aspect here, because what happens in these stories is that you will have the teenager and the guy who's much older than them, and they're dating. And specifically, I'm going to bring up Twilight because I think that is a good place to talk about how wrong it can go. And what happens is that you will have someone who's much older, and because of that, they have more power than the teenage character. This forms a power imbalance that is usually left unexplored because, again, power fantasy. And also, I'm not dismissing that power fantasies can explore something, by the way. It's just that it's usually the way it comes up. So at least it's usually the way I have read them. A power fantasy can totally explore something if you want it to, but this is the ones I've read. So what happens is that there is a power imbalance, and as the older person, they can pretty much do almost anything they want, and the teenage character may not feel comfortable saying no, or they're written, like Bella, as someone who is perfectly happy to follow Edward's lead most of the time and dismisses his abusive tendencies. So it does become a problem, because if you write those characters, you are writing very problematic fiction, and you are showing teenagers that certain things that are technically wrong, abusive tendencies and isolation is an abusive tendency as well, is perfectly okay. So you are depicting toxic relationships as perfectly healthy ones. I have conflicting views on problematic and toxic fiction, in social toxic relationships being portrayed. I have conflicting views, and the main view I have is if they are the thing is that I have the views I have is that if it's YA fiction specifically. Actually, no. If it is adult fiction and you are portraying a very problematic romance and it's just like toxic in all areas, I don't care, because you wrote it for an adult audience. Now, there are people who will say that fiction influences people, and while I think that's true, it's true that it can influence people, fiction that they read can influence people, they are also adults who should know better, and authors at the end of the day, I don't think are writing for the audience that wants that healthy romance. Everything you write has an audience, and the toxic romance and the ones like 50 Shades of Grey and After fit under the dark romance kind of spectrum, where that's like the audience that is for them. It's also for audiences like me who just want to rip it apart, but like it fits that audience, right? So that's the thing. You are writing for a specific audience, but you're also writing for an adult audience who should know better. But when it comes to teenagers, I do have conflicting views, because I do not believe that, I think that for teenagers it's a little bit different, because teenagers don't have their brains fully developed, which means that they may interpret things a little bit differently from the way an adult will. Actually, no, that's not true. They will definitely interpret things differently from an adult, and because they will be interpreting it differently, you can't perceive how, in general, they can't perceive like the certain things are the way that are. Oh god, I'm losing my point. I'm getting distracted. I'm sorry. But basically, I think the teenager will interpret things differently from an adult. And because they will interpret things very differently, it's definitely possible that they will take what you write as like at face value. They'll take it at face value, and they will be influenced in the way they might pursue relationships because it's how they read. But at the same time, it is not the author's responsibility to write for the way that their audience will interpret things. It is not an author's responsibility to be like, if I write this, my audience will be influenced into this bad relationship. It is not. At the end of the day, it is a parent's responsibility to be like, okay, if you're consuming this or whatever, like it is their responsibility to be like, this is not good, this is actually bad, and educate their children. It is also the parent's responsibility to supervise the content that teenagers specifically consume. So at the same time, it's not the author's responsibility, but I do find it terrible when YA fiction does have very problematic aspects and the author does write them as healthy. So at the same time, like there are just too many I think my views are blurred here. I have conflicting views, and I don't think I can settle directly on one. Like on one hand, I don't think that such problematic fiction should be available to teenagers, but at the same time, even if it's not marked as YA, they're gonna seek it out. So that's the thing. And then also, I don't want like the audience expectation to be in the author's responsibility. It's not. They already have the responsibility to write the book. Why should their responsibility also be to their audience and how they will interpret things? So my views are blurred here, but I also think there is a way to put things together where you can write like where the author could potentially do the bare minimum of like writing, hey, especially if it's a teenager, this is not great, this is not healthy, something along those lines in order to either educate teenagers. You can do the bare minimum of that if you want, if you feel comfortable doing so, but at the same time, it's not a responsibility of the author. Let's move on to the next tip because I have been ranting for some time. Okay, trope number 2. I called it tip 2 in last clip, sorry. So it says, the teenager who's actually ancient. Again, this is another Twilight trope, and I think one that she has definitely hinted at before, so I don't know why she's bringing it back up when you could have actually put the dark and mysterious guy with the ancient teenager, because they would have fit. But the one thing I will say about this trope is this is a trope that has shifted over time. I haven't seen it I've seen it in YA very rarely. The last time was Light Lark. I don't think it's died out of YA, but I think it's something you can find more in adult fiction, like Sarah J. Maas's stuff. Then again, Throne of Glass was originally YA, which is where I'm saying that YA is shifting. Let's talk a little bit about that. So I said that YA is kind of shifting with the age range where it kind of blurs into new adult, and new adult is 18 to 25. And Throne of Glass was marketed as far as I understand it as YA, with characters with Selena being 19. The same can also be said for I think you may be able to say the same thing for the Ember Quartet, which is an Ember in the Ashes Quartet by Saba Tahir, where you do have at least two characters in their 20s, two characters that are like 20, and then you have you also have what is her name? Lila, who is 17. So it does blur a little bit into the new adult sphere. So YA is definitely shifting, and because of it, you will see more of the mysterious guy in in maybe like new adult to young adult, I think. At least in my reading, that's where I have seen it. So you'll have things like in Sarah J. Maas, where it's like A Court of Thorns and Roses, where Rhysand does appear extremely mysterious throughout the books until he kind of reveals more of himself to Feyre. So and then there is Throne of Glass, also by Sarah J. Maas, where it's like where you will see where Rowan appears a little bit more mysterious throughout Heir of Fire. So I think it blends, but I don't think it's completely just a young adult. These are just young adult tropes, including the I'm just in the teenager who's this is where I'm saying about the first trope, the teenager, however, who's actually ancient. I think that one has actually phased out. At least I haven't seen this one. So the one where it's like dark and mysterious, I think is still abundantly there, but has been kind of absorbed into like the sphere of new adult, which also blends with young adult. And then there is the teenager who's actually ancient, that I'm pretty sure has phased out. There is, of course, again, Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses, where you do have Feyre and Selena / Aelin, who are 18 and 19 and falling for 200 and like a 300 and 500-year-old guys respectively. So I guess you can say that's still there, but it's more into that landscape of young adult that is more into that new adult era. And because YA is changing and seems to be shifting into like new adult territory, I wonder if the category will eventually evolve to a point where it will either be two separate forms of young adult, or if it'll just be like teen and young adult, where young adult actually means new adult, because new adult does seem unnecessary when you have young adult kind of shifting into the parts of new adult. So I think that YA's transition hasn't finished. It hasn't finished being executed. So I guess we'll see how young adult changes in the next couple of years. But I am very curious to see if maybe new adult won't be a thing anymore, and instead that'll be like the new young adult. I am very curious about that. Let me know what you think about that. Would you like that change? Because I definitely would. That way there will be less. I think the young adult will be hopefully less dismissed if that's the case. But also I think it'll fit more of what young adult currently feels like, you know? Everything about this sounds like a nightmare. You have to be stuck in your pubescent body for eternity. I would walk my vampire ass straight into the sunlight and let my damn self burn. As we already covered, these characters are usually attending high school, which would never in a million years happen. Okay, so before we continue, let's talk about everything we've just read so far. So again, hinting to Twilight. Like I said, these kind of tropes where the teenager is ancient and the dark and mysterious guy, honestly seem to have become really popular with Twilight. I could be wrong, but this is where a lot of those tropes seem to be really popular in, at least in the YA I read. Like, this is where it's becoming really popular. It feels like it's a Twilight thing. And she talks about this. And I'm going to agree with her on one area here, and it is the fact that it makes no sense that characters, even though they appear as teenagers, if they are older, it makes no sense whatsoever that they would be in high school, which is why Twilight made no sense. It made no sense why Edward and the rest of the Cullen family, those who appeared to look like teenagers and apparently have the mental, well, they don't have the mental capacity. Actually, no, I'm going to explain that later. But appear to be teenagers are attending high school. This makes no sense, especially when you hear that Edward got like 2 degrees or something like that, because they have been living for hundreds of years, and while they appear teenagers, they don't, it doesn't make sense why they would be in high school when they're like in their hundreds and something, and then there's like the thousands. Now in Twilight, Meyer did attempt to explain this by saying that it's a way to keep their cover, and apparently in her universe, and this lore wasn't expanded on super well, but in her universe, when you are turned as a vampire, you also seem to like stay in that state, at least physically, but it's implied that you also stay in that state mentally. But then that rule is completely broken, because you have Edward, who studied 2 degrees and who appears to be intelligent, and the others who actually seem to be able to make it work because they also seem to be intelligent. So that rule is established while it's established, but it's also broken. So because of it, it doesn't make sense. That's where I will agree with her. This idea that someone who appears to be a teenager is attending high school, even though they're like hundreds and thousands years old, doesn't make any sense. The only reason I can see that coming up is, again, power fantasy. But you can make it work better even in a power fantasy. The way I would write this is that well, first of all, I would take away the power imbalance where the teenager falls in love with like a 17, the guy who's hundreds of years old falls in love with a teenager, and instead make it that the reason they're in high school is specifically because they need something. So say that you are writing a fantasy and the guy appears to be a teenager and they're like 300 years old. And maybe your plot is that they need to protect someone, and they need to protect someone, and that person happens to be a teenage girl who's like 16. If they happen to be in high school, well, they already look like a teenager, so they can go to high school. They can be in the same grade. They can keep he can keep an eye on this girl and maybe even become her friend, which makes it easier to keep an eye on her. That way, there is a reason for the old guy that apparently appears to be a teenager to be in high school, because otherwise it would make no sense. So I will agree with her on that. It makes no sense. I didn't make it clear in that last clip, so just to make it clear, in this hypothetical storyline, the teenage girl and the guy that's like 300 years old, no, they don't fall in love. He would be kind of like a mentor of sorts. My idea would be of a teenage like power fantasy for this is if she's like really, really overpowered. She'll fit like the overpowered teenager who has to somewhat learn from like this mentor, and he's just there to protect her, but also eventually becomes her mentor and teaches her. Sort of like something like Yu-Gi-Oh, who is sort of overpowered, or at least the Pharaoh is overpowered, but Yugi sort of becomes like the guy who is kind of like his vessel. So think about it like that. Something similar to that. Or kind of like Overlord, who like where the teenager would be like super overpowered, but they have to learn. But this time just adding a mentor. So just to make that clear, that they would not be falling in love in this hypothetical story. And they end up falling in love with actual teenagers, which is undeniable pedophilia. So I also agree with her here. It is actually pretty bad. I discussed the power imbalance earlier, so I'm not going to repeat myself. It is actually pretty bad. This part is actually quite bad. It doesn't matter if he looks 16. He is old enough to be her great-grandfather. Again, this feels like a Twilight reference, and yeah, that's all. It makes sense. And honestly, how can they possibly enjoy the company of teenagers? From the moment you turn 20, everything about the teenage experience becomes obnoxious. Wow, your hormones are a mess. Oh no, no one understands you. This guy is paying taxes and getting colonoscopies, but please tell us all about how not making the cheer squad ruined your life. I know fiction is fantasy and we're supposed to overlook inconsistency, but this one's too gross to ignore. Okay, so let's talk about here. That. So I can actually see where she's going with this here. I am actually agreeing with her in these things, except that, like, I don't think when you turn 20, at least when I turned 20, I didn't think the teenage experience became obnoxious. So I can say that at least when I turned 20, it didn't feel obnoxious. It felt more like, okay, they probably just see someone to listen to them, So I feel like also, again, none of this, again, a lot of this does feel like stereotyping teenagers when it's like, oh no, your hormones are a mess. Oh no, no one understands you. Okay, the no one understands you is very familiar to teenagers, so it makes sense that they would explore this in YA. And it makes sense that their reactions are that way. I remember taking a developmental psychology class where it is talked about that the reason that they might react, like teenagers react in certain ways, is that, well, their brains are not fully developed into them. It's like it is the way they react is the way they're perceiving it. So I think that while I agree with her about the way that this trope is written and the way that it's usually, at least especially in Twilight, it's discussed and the things that make no sense, I do agree with her on the different, on some of the different things here. I do think that the guy who is like hundreds or thousands of years old going to high school makes no sense, and also how the power imbalance, like he falls in love with her, quote unquote, is definitely pedophilia. And also the fact that he is the idea that he is falling for her is considered good is actually quite bad. But also the idea that the person hundreds of years old is going to find teenage problems interesting. Yeah, I think that could be the case, but you can also write it that they're just maybe they're just listening because teenagers do need a way to do need someone to talk to, and sometimes they don't have those spaces. And the other thing that I will say to end this point and move on to the next point is that the teenage mind, again, the brain is not fully developed, so this is how they react, and I think we need to give them some grace in these books, of the way that they react. We definitely need to give them some grace. A lot of the reviews I have seen give for YA books, give teenagers a lot of grief for acting like teenagers and not understanding other people, and they give them a lot of grief, and I'm pretty sure I have done it too. I am trying to change that. I'm not saying it's gonna happen like that, but I am trying to change that. But the problem is that by giving them so much grief, we do dismiss that, for teenagers, certain things are a certain way, and they might react differently, and they might react as more dramatic than you think they should. So because of the character ages, I think as a reviewer, I would like to do a better job at not giving teenagers so much grief for the actions they take. So that is one of the things I also want to say. Like they get teenage characters get a lot of grief. I think one of the things in the Hunger Games, Katniss tends to get a lot of grief for the way she handled things, but at the same time, she's 16, had no good role models for growing up, and she's also a teenager thrust into an adult world. It makes sense. The way she acts makes sense. So it's one of those things. I think it's important to realize that if you are writing young adult, or if you are reading young adult, it's important to think critically about what you read, but also realize that while I do not review with audience in mind necessarily, the only thing I take into account when it comes to audience is the character and the character ages and how I feel like it would make sense. So let's move on to the next point. Actually, we're going to move on to the next point a little bit later. For you, it'll be right away, but I will come back a little bit later because I'm going to take a nap, but I will come back for the next point in a little bit. So we'll move on to the next point, and hopefully these tangents aren't getting boring for you guys. Okay, so I am back to move on to point 3. So let's see. The trope is, I'm so plain, no one will ever notice me. Again, I feel like this became really popular through Twilight, but I don't know if that's completely correct. But I can understand why this trope is annoying, but at the same time, this trope or this kind of story does fit a demographic that it does fit not a demographic, but it does fit the issues that maybe one demographic of readers might be dealing with at the time. They may be dealing with their insecurities. Give me a second. Let me disconnect my echo. There we go. Someone who is dealing with insecurities. So this is actually pretty much expected. This is a trope that actually works both in a power fantasy and in exploring insecurities. Now, sometimes it does not explore insecurities. Most of the time, where I have read it, it's kind of just used as a way to be like, she's plain, but she's really pretty, and for some reason doesn't know it, but it doesn't necessarily always explore insecurity, not even in power fantasies, like not even like, I think the reason it just doesn't get explored, not even slightly, not even subtly, I'm sorry, it doesn't get explored even subtly. But I think this is why. This is part of the idea of that I think I know I discussed earlier, was the idea of making some of the characters, like Bella, for example, a very much blank slate. It's for the reader to live vicariously through them. And In the I'm so plain, no one will notice me it is rooted in insecurity, at least in my opinion. It does hit the insecurity, especially when you write the fact that people do notice this person. So it is a very interesting trope, and I think there's a lot that can be explored with that kind of trope, and like why they feel that way, or something in that form. Although I will say I don't see it as often anymore in my reading of YA. I could be wrong, but I don't see it very often. The ones I'm seeing now, the characters I know that I'm seeing now, do seem to know that they're very pretty, and I don't see this trope as much anymore. I see a trope where they deal with other insecurities now in YA. YA fiction, in general fiction, seems to deal a lot more with um, things like things related to mental health. I read recently, well, maybe not super recently, but last year I read Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. So most of the way I've read is mostly things with like that. Or what is that called? I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. So YA is shifting. Stories specifically written for teens now are shifting to deal more with the mental health aspects rather than the physical insecurities in my reading. So it is a trope that I don't see very often anymore. So I let's see what she has to say about it though. But I will say that you can see it in older YA like Twilight. So is she basing this on older YA like that? Is she basing this on older YA? A lot of these tropes feel more familiar to older YA, not YA not now's like version of YA. Although some of those tropes could have a comeback in books like Lightlark, but barely. I don't Lightlark and Iron Widow maybe, but even Lightlark and Iron Widow don't use this trope, so except for literally every boy in this novel, especially the dark, mysterious one. And my best friend, they're gonna fight for me because I'm so plain in a supremely gorgeous way. I think the reason we get the plain female MC who's actually beautiful is because the writer doesn't want to make her seem vain. They portray her as if she finds herself ordinary, but lo and behold, she's mistaken. I think it's also an attempt to make her relatable because a lot of young girls have body image issues. So if they see this plain chick getting chased down by boys, they think, oh my gosh, it could happen to me. It could happen to me too. So I both agree and disagree with this. So I do think that it's possible. I don't think that the authors will do this to make them seem vain. Again, this is very, I see this very, I don't see this in YA anymore. I don't see this kind of trope in YA. I'm looking at the tropes now and I'm really feeling like a lot of them are touching older YA. But there is a point there where they authors could potentially make them a little bit relatable by establishing that she does feel insecure about her image, and you can still use this trope to provide to use that, even though it doesn't show up. I'm sorry, to say those, to illustrate those points. Sorry, I've been talking for a little bit. To illustrate those points. So you can definitely use the trope, but I don't see it used anymore. If the author writes those characters that way, it is usually to illustrate something specific. And for example, in Twilight, we're coming back to Twilight because all these tropes that she's pointing out are in Twilight. and I can still remember specific parts of Twilight. Though it's been since 2020 since I read it. I'll probably reread it for this channel and like review it and tell you my my thoughts. I've told you a little bit, but I want to look at it a different way after reading the heroine's journey. So let's look at Twilight. So in Twilight, Bella is supposed to be the plain girl who no one will notice, but she becomes very popular. Although in the book it is stated that she's mainly really popular because she is their police chief's daughter and she hasn't been there in like years, and it's also noted that it's a very small town, so she is new. She's going to be popular either way because it's a small town, and I've lived in a small town. It happens, right? So that's something. But every boy does notice her, and we're meant to, I think, infer that she doesn't seem to understand why. But also, the one thing that Stephenie Meyer didn't quite do is explain why she has this insecurity, what leads her to believe herself to be plain, even though she is really pretty and Edward finds her pretty for some reason. I don't agree with that relationship. I spent my time reading several books of Twilight, and I either ship Bella and Alice or Bella and Rosalie. Edward, let him die. But the point is, the thing that could help this trope, if you're going to write it, at least in my opinion, is to establish the reasons they feel insecure. And it's not just that they are teenagers, because when teenagers when anybody, children and teenagers and even adults feel insecure, it is because it is rooted in something. So I'm gonna get personal a little bit here. I used to be very insecure about my blindness, and I used to hate being blind, and I wanted it to kind of just end. I wanted a cure because I wanted to see like everybody else. But a lot of this was rooted in bullying. I went through a lot of bullying as a kid because I'm blind. I'm a blind girl. It was really easy for people to bully me over it. And because of that, I developed a lot of insecurities as a kid. I eventually kind of got over it, I think, when I was like 10, and I was just like, okay, I don't care anymore. I think it just became something I eventually just realized it was pointless. But insecurity is rooted in something. And the question is, what was Bella's insecurity rooted in? And I don't think it's as simple as, oh, she's a teenager, they're insecure. There's usually more, at least in my experience. So it's something that happens. If you choose to do the I'm plain, and no one will notice me, and the character is really pretty, I think the best way to do it is to give a reason for the insecurity, because insecurity is rooted in something. Insecurities don't just you don't just become insecure for no reason. So it could be maybe the media. It could be you don't look like these people, and maybe even though it's someone says something to you about your appearance, so you don't, or a bunch of people. Family has a really big influence. Friends, other people around you have a pretty big influence on a lot of the way that you think about yourself. So that is that is something that could be established. This trope is not dead, trust me, but it's not a dead trope. You can definitely use it, but it isn't something I see anymore. So a lot of this feels like she's focusing so much on older YA. I don't see this in new YA, as I have said again. I just want to make it clear that just because I haven't seen this trope, it doesn't mean it's not being written anymore. It's actually very possible, well, actually not even just very possible, it's definitely possible, that I just happen to read very different YA, and in the YA that I read, it doesn't usually come up, not even the contemporary YA, and I say it that way because, or with that caveat, because I read mainly like YA fantasy, and then sometimes I will read contemporary YA, depending on like on circumstances, either if I find if it's interesting, if I see it a lot online, if the book club I'm part of is reading a YA fantasy, or if the synopsis just grabs my attention. Also, I should say that even in the older YA I started reading, because my reading journey began with like early 2000s YA, even in that YA, and like those books, that trope wasn't really there. I actually know about this specific cliche, really, because it's really, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a trope to me, but this like cliche, I really know more about it, about this specific like power fantasy-ish kind of thing, mainly because of Twilight. Like that was my introduction to this specific framing. But even in the older YA that I read, this was just not part of it. So I just may be reading like different YAs, so I just haven't seen it. So my landscape of reading is definitely influencing the fact that I'm just like, I don't really see this anymore. Anyway, on to the rest of this video. But you still provided a physical description, and it was very unplain. Glistening green eyes. Oh, that is a weird description. Rivers of crimson hair. Boobs that are just too big. If only she could find a way to cover them up. And honestly, if you do make her real plain, not fake plain, but actually plain, why can't her love interest be plain too? Guys have body image issues too. Okay, so I will talk about that here. There is, I think, in the literature I have read, there is definitely, from what I don't pay enough attention to know this, but I have read I do consume reviews, and I know this is a thing. There is a very actually no, there's not a diverse representation of people. Literature has this issue. The diversity of people, it can be hard to find. The ones that are diverse, I don't find them often. I find them very rarely, but you can find them. But those that are the ones that are prevalent, at least in my reading, don't always have the most diverse cast of characters of different body types and following the same or having the same issues. So I can kind of see where this is coming from. I do hope this part gets much better, but I can't really give too much here, because honestly, these are things I don't fully understand. And they talk about physical appearance, which I have a hard time actually understanding, because but I don't have a good view. I never saw, so I don't understand much of this stuff. Descriptions fly over my head so fast. I don't really have a point here to give. Sorry, and this is not giving me any vehicle of a conversation, so to have here, except that as much as possible, it would be great if maybe young adult became as diverse as possible. And the way to do that is to, I think, lift as many diverse books as possible. I know that that you can find them through YouTube. So see if you can. I know that some YouTubers definitely show the different books that have a diverse cast of characters with diverse body types. I do know that those are there. I need to take note on that. And maybe read more of those books, but I do know that they're there, so you can definitely always look for them. So I don't have much of a point here. All right, trope 4. The reluctant chosen one. Okay, I think that is still something that might be popular in YA. I could be wrong. I actually don't see this much. I don't see this very much in the YA I read, but this could still be popular. The reluctant chosen one, though, is interesting because it specifically is a callback, I think, to the hero's journey. So you are like the reluctant hero. It's So it's the part of the hero's journey where the hero finally does decide to go to the adventure. So you have like the call to adventure, but then the hero may not go through it. So we kind of like show like their normal lives and how it is, and then there might be a point where they get the call to adventure, but they're like, I don't want to do this. Like, why am I like chosen for this? I don't want to do this. And then something happens that makes them decide to go in the adventure. So they go from reluctance to just doing what they need to do. And it is an interesting story structure. What I'm looking at here is an interesting story structure, and I think it can be useful, and I think you can definitely do it. I will say, however, that the reluctant chosen one is something that I am still seeing, at least in some of the fiction I've read, but I don't see it necessarily in adult all the time. I'm sorry, in young adult all the time. I have seen it, I think, like reluctant chosen one can be, I think it was present a little bit in Throne of Glass, but not very much. And then also in House of, in Crescent City. But Crescent City is strictly adult, so I don't see it as much in YA. I think it's becoming less popular, but I don't know if this is the case. I haven't seen it, but that doesn't mean that's becoming less popular. Then again, that means I really haven't read much YA this year, I think. So sometimes I don't mind the reluctant chosen one, especially if what they're chosen for fucking sucks. You have to save the entire planet from flesh-eating aliens, and you'll probably die in the process. No thanks, cut me out. But in young adult novels, the chosen one is usually something unbelievably awesome. You are the long-lost son of King Arthur. You are the heir to the fairy kingdom. You are the most powerful witch in all the land. Who would not want to be any of those things? Those ungrateful teenagers. That's who. They're always putting up a fuss, kicking and screaming. This is how she wrote this, by the way. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. So, yes, teenagers are like usually YA. Now these are things I have seen in YA. Those kind of reluctant chosen ones. I've seen them, but I haven't seen them as recently. But in the last couple of years, I've seen it. Let's think. Heart of Iron. Yes. Heart of Iron by Ashley Poston. You have Anna, who has, spoilers by the way, Anna who has been chosen, and you find out that she is technically supposed to be the Empress, but she doesn't like this stuff. She doesn't want to do it, but she's reluctant to it, but eventually she does go through it. Now these are things that I have seen. Now, why would a teenager be reluctant to this? Well, it could be the fact that it's change. It involves change. And not all teenagers do good with change. And it means that their entire life has been twisted upside down. Like everything they knew is like has been just twisted upside down. Everything they knew is no more. It don't exist. None of it matters. So the reason I think this is fine is because it represents a need for certain things to stay the same. And not all teenagers are going to do very good with change. They're going to be like, I don't want this. Why do I want this? My life is going really well right now. Why do I want to be this and that? Now there is also the story where there is, of course, a story where they're like really excited over it and cute, and maybe you're like, okay, great, I am this person, that's awesome. But if you get if I get you are the heir to this, and I'm like, I don't want that crap, because change is not always wanted. So when you thrust this kind of choice to a teenager, they're going to be like, no, I don't want it. It makes sense to me why the teenagers would be reluctant. They don't want to let go of their lives. Yeah, I'm starting to realize something about these tropes, actually. But we're going to talk about more. I'm going to start to realize something a little bit more. Not that it's older YA. Not just that it's older YA, but one other thing that is it's very interesting. But we're going to talk about that in the end in my final thoughts. I want to see if this actually continues. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with realism in books. And then we'll talk about that later in my final thoughts, though, because I actually want to talk about that. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting it's a very interesting thought process I have regarding this. Well, you know what? No, hold on. Actually, no, wait. We'll wait. Yes, we'll wait. But no is it is about realism in books. And I will talk about that later because I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about and where it kind of falls when writing. I just want to be a normal teenager. Normal teenagers have body acne. They have to run the mile once a week. They have a curfew. You get to be a mermaid and fall in love with a hot mer prince. But sure, here's some benzoyl peroxide and rampant insecurity. Knock yourself out. So again, we're running into the problem that, again, this comes off very dismissive. I think there is a reason for teenagers to react the way they do. There is a reason they wouldn't want that kind of change. Even as an adult, that kind of change would just be like, hell no, I'm good, because that kind of change involves getting used to a new life, and not all teenagers are going to be willing to do that or going to like that kind of thing. So it does come across this again. We have that problem where her comments at the end of this trope feel dismissive, and they feel dismissive toward teenagers in general. It's not fun, because on one hand, I can understand her points. I can, looking at it as an adult, and you think it is super irrational. But on the other hand, when you look at it as an adult and you're just like, you look at their decision making, you're like, it's super irrational. Why wouldn't you want that? But when you think a little bit deeper, you're like, oh wait, maybe that, the change would be too much even for me. It's hard to give her I think it's hard to agree with her on this because of how dismissive she sounds. It really is. Okay, so I will come back later for point 5. I have a thing to do right now. I have a meeting, I have a call, and then I have writing sprints. But I will come back as soon as I can. I know I'm not going to be able to record this all in one sitting. So, 2 points have taken me a little bit over half an hour. So, but I will be back hopefully soon. And I will continue talking about this, because I think this is an interesting conversation that we can have, and this is just an interesting discussion of tropes, and I love talking about tropes. Okay, you guys, I'm back hours later and we're moving on to tip number 5. Let's see if I can finish this video today, because tomorrow I'm going out and I'll be out all day and won't be in the mood to record when I get back, because but number 5 is, but why are they the chosen one? Now I'm gonna say this doesn't feel like a trope. There's just a lot of this stuff is very interesting, and I'll talk about it, I think, toward the end. But what I'm gonna say is this already feels like a continuation of the 4th trope. It feels like a continuation of the 4th thing that she doesn't like, and I don't know how I feel about it. It just feels like a continuation, and there doesn't seem to be anything there that's going to be interesting. But I will say, usually when YA and the chosen ones, of course you're going to have you might have a chosen one that happens to be a teenager, because if it's written for teens, the reason can be explained, but it doesn't always matter. If it's written well, though, there will be some kind of explanation in the original source material. So why will be explained by the book. Okay. Why is the chosen one 16 years old? And why did they have to wait for the worst birthday ever to learn of their magical destiny? As a writer, I understand the intention. This is a young adult book, and you're trying to tell your teenage audience that they can achieve anything they set their minds to, which is a beautiful message. Okay. If you understand, I can see it as a writer. Okay. Like why, if you understand it, then as a writer, I don't understand the problem here. But also, as for what she says about 16 and waiting for the worst birthday ever to learn about your magic and your destiny, well, again, that will be explained by the lore. That would be explained, if done well, it'll be explained by the lore. Even if done badly, it'll just be explained by the lore. Like, you can explain a lot of things, especially in like fantasy specifically, because some of these this trope, I think, is usually conveyed more in fantasy. But but usually, even when it's done badly, it'll be explained by the lore. There will be some reason, whether it makes sense or not, it'll be explained by the lore. If done well, the reason will make sense. So yeah, that's it. That's all I can say about that part. But why then does that teenage chosen one fucking suck? I've read so many books where the chosen one does nothing but make everything worse. I understand there's a learning curve, but are they ever gonna learn? Why must the blunderings take up the entire book? And this isn't an inspiring message. If anything, it says, look at that, all that effort, and you'll still fail because you're the worst. Personally, I think middle grade novels do a way better job of this. Maybe YA authors should take note. Okay, so first of all, middle grade novels do a better job at a lot of things that, in my opinion, YA doesn't do as much. Or not even just YA, just adults in general. Like, there are a lot of things, but then again, middle grade, if I'm being honest, hasn't really been it hasn't been shifting. Like, middle grade has remained mostly the same from what I remember as a teenager. Middle grade hasn't been shifting as much as as like YA and in general literature for teens. In a way, I think middle grade has been not necessarily the same, but it has been but it has been at a similar like, it's been similar to what it used to be. I don't remember what word I'm looking for, so I'm just gonna retrace. It's been similar to what it used to be. So middle grade hasn't shifted as much as YA has, where YA sells a lot, but also it's been exploring different things, where it seems to now, before it used to be like a teen audience, but now people of all ages read it, especially people in their 20s, from what I understand. I could be wrong about that research, because I'm not really researching, but I have heard videos where it's like people in their 20s that tend to read a lot of YA. And so it has shifted to accommodate those readers to an extent, it seems to me. So as to why there is, if you understand, here's the one thing I don't understand about this part that she's talking about. She says that she understands that there is a learning curve, but will they ever really learn? And she says it's a terrible message when it like the way that it's written, where it's like with all the blunders, and it's like, look, it sends teens a message that they will fail even through the effort. I don't think that's the case. If anything, a lot of the Chosen One stories that I have read with young adult characters are usually, yes, they make mistakes. I mean, the good ones. We're talking about the good ones. We're not talking about the others. But if they make mistakes, usually by the end they do learn from these mistakes. And while they make everything worse, in the end they also make it better. They do the work to make it better. So actually the message, in my opinion, that it usually sends is, yes, you can make mistakes, but the important part is that you learn from those mistakes, and that you do the work to fix those mistakes. Not that it's going to give them a bad message, because if you're going to do the Chosen One that makes no mistakes, that kind of story may not be what all teenagers want to read, and in general it may not be the best story, because the Chosen One that makes no mistakes and that does everything right, and I'm also talking about in general Jenna's book, Moreci's book, because while she does not write young adult, she does write adult, and her Chosen One characters, or in general her characters, the good ones specifically, they make no mistakes. Everything they do is fine. And that is not a fun story. If anything, it's a story that I like to... I actually own her books, by the way. I do own her books on Audible. I could have returned them, but I decided not to, because I sometimes need a story that I can put in the background and just be like, I need to turn off my brain and disengage. And this is the story for that. So I think there is something to be said about that. That if you make the Chosen One makes no mistakes, it's not a compelling story. It is a power fantasy, and not all power fantasies are compelling. Not all power fantasies are as equal, if I'm being honest. So what you're doing, if you make a perfect Chosen One, at least in my opinion, you're working more like a power fantasy. And if that's what you want to write, cool. Let me know if you have written one. I will be happy to read it, because power fantasies are fun. They're fun. They're engaging. And they can be some of the most exciting reads ever. And I think it's okay. It's okay to do that. I want to write a power fantasy. I'm working on at least one. For fun. So I would like to write one. But the perfect Chosen One is the perfect lead-in for that, for a power fantasy. And if you have a hero that makes no mistakes and doesn't make things worse beforehand, they have no reason to learn. By making mistakes is the way you learn. And that is the perfect part about the Chosen One. character who makes all the blunders and messes up throughout the story. That's why it's fun. So again, this was just an extension of tip 4, of point 4. That's all this was. So let's move on to the next tip, or the next point. I don't, this one I'm going to have a lot to say on. I've already read it. I've already read like the title for this, and I have a couple of things to say on it already. It's also worth noting here that the usually in The Chosen One, when these teenagers make mistakes, they go through a pretty interesting character arc, at least the ones I've read. But also, it's also worth noting that generally The Chosen One is a kind of power fantasy, whether that is a perfect one, a perfect chosen one or not. So, at least in my opinion, the teenager who ends up making mistakes does work hard to make things better, and they work hard to like learn from said mistakes. And what ends up happening is that the message is also reversed. Not just the, or not reversed, I'm sorry. It's not, the message isn't only that, you know, that you can make a lot of mistakes and what happened and, you know, what matters is what you do with that. But also the message turns out to be as well, in addition, that hard work will get you what you want. And that is a power fantasy that is pretty popular, especially in anime. Like if you watch Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, in that case it's the power of friendship, but in the main character does work, Yugi and stuff does work really hard to maintain the power that he has. Another good one that I think works for that is Dragon Ball, which is which follows a character or characters who work really hard and they get really, really powerful. So I can give you a couple of stories that I've seen, not just books, that do have this. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, Harry Potter does something similar to this as well. So The Chosen One is a power fantasy, no matter how you slice it, even if it's not a perfect chosen one. There is a power fantasy element. So, you know, it's interesting to look at this trope. I actually really like this trope, so I enjoy reading it. So I just feel you know, let's have some defense for the Chosen One trope. Or extra defense in post. All right, point 6. The 30-year-old woman living vicariously through a fictional teenager. Let me say the first part that I want to say. This is not a trope. This is a kind of person. So I am, again, I told you before, I'm familiar with Moreci's content. And one of the things that I have noticed, and I think you have noticed it already. We are on point 6. This should already be noticeable. Some of the things, well, actually, I don't know if well, it hasn't been noticeable yet, I don't think. But some of the things that Moreci does is she will mix tropes with other things. And a lot of the things that she says are tropes are regular cliches, right? But also, even if they aren't, right, she'll mix things like this into the list. Things that are not tropes. This is a reader. This is a kind of reader, which honestly I've never met. So, or have seen before in the at least in the YouTube sphere I hang out at. I haven't seen this kind of reader, but even if that was the case, there is something to be said about living vicariously through fictional characters. I do that. I have fun with it. Not necessarily if they're just teenagers or they could be adults, I don't care. But the interesting part about fiction specifically is that you can do something like that. You can live vicariously through a character, especially if you see yourself through that character. The whole point of fiction is to explore things that maybe you're not always comfortable exploring in real life. So that's one way to read fiction. Read about things that you're not familiar with. So, for example, I let's see. Let's say that there is a story out about I don't know, I can't think of anything. God damn it, I can't think of anything. But never mind, I can't really think of much at the moment. But like the interesting part about fiction is that you can do that. You can read for exploration's sake, and sometimes you see yourself in the characters. I think the one of the best things that young adult fiction does, and I think all fiction does this, but young adult fiction especially does this really, really well. Young adult fiction allows a teenage audience to see their issues represented, because teenagers can be dismissed, and Moreci has done that in this post. Maybe it is just a sarcastic kind of dismissal, but it is dismissive. Teenagers can potentially be dismissed all the time. Their issues are dismissed all the time. And in young adult fiction that's specifically written for teenagers, teen readers can see their issues represented and maybe feel less alone. And if you are older and you are reading young adult and you are seeing the issues that maybe you went through as a teenager and you are seeing them represented, this could be another moment to look at those issues and be like, I am not, I wasn't alone. Like, teenagers, have these issues. Like, another character has it. Sometimes it's something. Sometimes you can find yourself in fiction a little bit more than you can find yourself in real life, and you can find some of the things that you want represented in fiction a lot easier than you will find it to be in real life. So yes, living vicariously through a character is not always a bad thing, because you can see yourself in those characters sometimes. And young adult fiction does a really good job at presenting issues that teenagers may go through. And that's one of the things that I think young adult fiction does really, really well. It's one of the reasons I love YA fiction. It explores a lot of issues that I don't always see in adult fiction. So of course I enjoy it because of that. All right, here's what she has to say. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The 16-year-old main character of this young adult novel loves her Starbucks black drip, even though we all know teenagers are out there guzzling frappuccinos. Her favorite book is The Great Gatsby, a book that most teens avoid like the plague because it's required reading. She also says things like goodness or oh my stars, because we all know teenagers talk like soccer moms. And if she dares to try alcohol, she's gonna go for a fun little rosé, because that's what teenagers drink. Not cheap beer or hard alcohol mixed with Mountain Dew. Okay, so in this, I think I see what she means, a 30-year-old living vicariously through the teenager, I think, in this one. But it doesn't make any sense. Again, let's go back to Twilight, because Twilight has been the biggest reference of this video. Oh, Twilight. Here's the thing. This was a thing. This was something that I think I saw mostly in Twilight. This is a trope that still exists and is still written. Now, when it comes to Twilight, though, it was specifically Bella who loved Jane Austen a lot and loved a lot of classic novels and kept comparing her love story with Edward to the love story in Wuthering Heights. And I've never read Wuthering Heights. I don't know anything about it. I know that I was supposed to read it for summer reading in high school. and I didn't read it. That's all I know about it. Yes, teenagers do avoid some required reading. I did it. I avoided it like the plague indeed. But the thing is that this is someone who this is a character that I mainly saw in Twilight, and that's it. In my reading, I haven't really seen that kind of character again. I haven't seen that character. That could be the case, but also, depending on the character, this kind of thing could still work. I just want to say that this kind of character can still work. I said before this was a kind of reader in the last clip. I think I'm wrong. I think she's talking about a kind of writer that writes this kind of character, and I still don't think this is a bad thing. I think the rest of the things I said still make sense. I mean, I write to explore. While I write strictly in adult, even though I think my stuff can be read by teenagers. But while I write specifically in the adult category, I will say that again, I write that way, but I explore the things that I want to, and in some of my characters, particularly in my sapphic romance, The Voice in My Dreams, I explore an aspect. Oh, shush, Aylin. Sorry. I explore specific aspects of my life in that character, and I had some realizations about a couple of things. But I am 23, and I think I made my character around my age. Yeah, around my age. If I'm looking at it correct. Yeah, around my age. Like 22. So I am seeing I am someone who is, in a weird way, writing the fantasy of living vicariously through this character. In a way, the 30-year-old writer who she is talking about is actually someone who might be, writing the type of teenager she wished she was. And that's okay too. That's okay. It's okay to have that kind of character. Yes, teens probably will not talk like those characters or do certain things. Although, goodness, as she said, is very possible that depending on the dialogue that you're writing, it could work. Like, there are things in this trope that could work. So there's nothing wrong with this trope, honestly. There's really not that. It's not that bad. It's not really a trope. It's a kind of writer, and Moreci will constantly mix things like this into the trope list. I was considering mentioning this at the end of the video, but since she mentioned required reading, this seems like a really good place to add this in. So one of the things that I have heard before is that required reading, it took away kind of like other people's reading, like their love of reading. I never had this issue because I was always encouraged to read, but also I read a lot during my free time during my teen years, which is why I think I'm still an avid reader today. When I was 13, I got an account through Bookshare, a really great nonprofit organization that provides accessible reading. Sorry about my phone. Accessible books to for people to be able to read in a bunch of different formats. And speaking of Bookshare, they are actually currently running a fundraiser in order to raise $200,000 to help I think children in India to get books, and to train people there as well to use Bookshare in 20 schools. So if you would like to donate, I will have the link in the description if you are interested in it, or at the very least, if you would share the word, spread the word, I'd be really happy with that. Thank you. That's my PSA. Love Bookshare because it's given me so much. And also, another little thing, if you are unable to read, to get my book, and I will have like the audiobook and everything available on YouTube, but if you want to read it in Braille but can't, but are unable to get it, you will be able to find it on Bookshare on release day. I did donate a copy to them. So yeah, and if anything, just email me and I will give you an accessible copy. But anyway, the point is that I never had the issue where required reading took away my love of reading, because I was always reading in my free time. And because I had a Bookshare account, I was able to get whatever books I wanted at any point in time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the exception of summers because the computer was not mine. So it was the school's, so I couldn't take it with me in the summers. So I would just download a bunch of books before I left, usually about 32 books for the summer. So I never had that problem. However, it is also safe to say that young adult stories like the ones that she is talking about do get people to read more than whatever is available to them in school. It is safe to say that because at least I've heard stories of things like, Harry Potter getting a new generation to read, and Twilight also got people to read as well. So whatever thoughts we may have on this category, it's fair, and it's fair to give credit where credit is due, and say that this category does get people to read, because whatever we may want to say about YA, the writing in YA is extremely accessible. Now, there are adult books that can be very accessible, but YA has a writing style that just can easily pull you in. It is extremely accessible in pretty much all the genres. You will always find accessible writing in young adult literature. You're not going to find writing that will feel too confusing in one way or another. It's usually pretty accessible. So whatever we may want to say about young adult, and whatever I have said and will continue to say in this video, YA books do get people to read, and it is important to give it that credit, no matter what we may think of it, either from the outside or as readers ourselves. I understand that we want to see ourselves in what we read. Well, I was right then. It might be a type of reader. But if you want to see a grown-ass white woman read books about grown-ass white women, young adult is for teenagers. And yes, it's fine for adults to read and enjoy them, but it's not fine to completely change the category for your own convenience. All right, so again, never mind. It is a kind of reader. I thought for a minute I was looking at I was right in the clip where I said it was a reader. Then I changed my mind to a writer, and now I have to change my mind back to readers. But the point still stands, though, as because what she's describing seems like it's shifting. She talks about a reader, but it's shifting, because in the first paragraph it talks about it like someone who's a writer, and then in the second paragraph it tells you it seems to talk about a reader, or maybe but it also shifts again to be a writer, because it talks about young adult fiction is for teenagers, and yes, it's okay for adults to read and enjoy them, but it's not fine to completely change the category for your own convenience. It almost sounds like a writer thing, but also disguised as reading. It sounds like a thing that both will do. So it's just it's a little bit confusing, but at the same time, I also don't see much of a problem here. And we're gonna see a very interesting point next, and I'm weirdly excited to talk about this one. I'm excited to talk about the next point. Number 7, it's young adult, but is it really? Okay, so this sounds, by the way, just without reading much into this sounds like it's going to talk about the sexual explicitness in young adult fiction. Not all young adult fiction, but definitely some young adult fiction is sexually explicit sometimes. Maybe not to the extent that adult would be sexually explicit, but to some extent. There are, for example, the young adult I have read that have had sex scenes usually have fewer sex scenes than some adult books. Now, let me just state, an adult book does not have to have sexual content to be considered adult. What makes an adult book adult is the subject matter and the, of course, explicitness, but also mainly the subject matter more than anything else. So usually erotica is for adults because it is very, very sexually explicit all the time. And then there is other books that are specifically for adults because of the subject matter that they follow. However, there is also a section of adult books that is more cozy in a sense. Like there is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which is an adult cozy fantasy. There is The Maid, which I guess fits into the adult cozy mystery. I think it's a cozy mystery. It's not something I enjoyed very much, but I think that's what it kind of feels like to a point, even though it totally tore down a formula I love. But yes, I think it's about to get into that. And I actually unlike when it comes to problematic and toxic relationships for young adult books, I actually do not have mixed feelings on this. But I want to see what she has to say. I want to see what she has to say and then give my opinions. But I think this is what it's about to be talked about. The sexual explicitness that has been entered into YA. This is going to be an interesting one. I'm very excited for this point. Okay. As we've already covered, a lot of adult women read young adult novels. Specifically, young adult fans... Wait, what? Hold on. Specifically, young adult fantasy and romance, which is fine. Read whatever the hell you want. But it's the same group of women who constantly demand steamy, graphic YA fiction. Here's something for your consideration. If you want more adult fiction, why don't you read adult fiction? Adult fantasy romance is booming, and it's full of all the violence and smut you could ask for. And you're out here demanding more sex scenes between 16-year-olds. You, my friend, are fucking gross. Okay, so let's talk about the sexually explicit part of YA. Now, I want to talk about two issues that generally I can think of. But I want to talk about them. I want to talk about them last because I want to talk about the main positive views. Now, like I said, I actually don't have mixed opinions on this. So here we go. So I think that the fact that young adult is becoming sexually explicit, or at least some of it does have sexually explicit scenes. Aylin, quiet. Sorry. The fact that some of it does have sexually explicit scenes is not a bad thing. And here's why. So, listen. We all know that teenagers are going to explore their sexuality in stuff like that, right? If anything, we also know that our sex education sucks. At least here in the US, sex ed is ain't that good. It's pretty bad, right? Young adult fiction I talked about is really good at representing and showing the issues that teenagers face. And I talked about how the issues of teenagers are dismissed, right? And young adult fiction allows them to see themselves and see their issues represented, and maybe make them feel like they're not alone. And it also could potentially allow them to explore those issues. The same thing can come with sex. Sexually explicit YA could potentially allow teenage readers to explore sex in a very safe way without getting themselves into trouble and without hopefully any consequences happening. Now, the parent should, of course, be responsible for what their teenage child reads, and if they don't want them to read this, that's fine. And they can, of course, if they choose to allow them to read it, you could potentially educate your teenage child on what they've read. I mean, I personally had very much unsupervised reading from my parents, and I turned out just fine. And I started reading Twilight at like 14 and was like, this is terrible. And I only made it to chapter 5. Think back when I read it back when I was 20. Listen, it is young adult fiction and fiction in general allows for exploration of certain things to be safe. So one of the issues, I think one of the things that I can mention, right? Not issues yet. Well, actually, not yet. Let me just give an example of adult fiction and then just relate it to my point. So in adult fiction, we're gonna go to dark romance. So I've done just a teeny tiny bit of research on dark romance because I want to write one for fun. I might publish it and be like, hey, this was my result. I want to see what happens. But basically, one of the things, and while I don't really read dark romance for pleasure, I can talk about it this way. So one of the things that dark romance does allow authors to do, and for readers to do as well, is explore the psychology of the characters and the power dynamics. So it allows them to kind of be like, because like people like to read something, like they might like to read certain things in fiction, and they're just like, I mean, it's so cute and romantic, but these people may be like, I don't want this in real life, right? But they can explore the fantasy that is provided to them by the author when they write dark romance. In young adult fiction, if they read a sexually explicit book, they can explore sex teenagers can explore sex without having to hopefully get into situations. I know that there are issues with like the idea of them reading this because they're like teens, but honestly, I think that, again, teenagers are changing. They're not who they were when you were born or when you were growing up. Hell, they're not like they were when I was growing up. And I am 23. I was born in 1999. I am very much Gen Z, and teenagers aren't the same anymore. So it is important to consider that as well. And again, this is also where I want to mention that even though we try to make YA non-explicit and we try to make it good for teens, teenagers will gravitate to other books that happen to be adults. And they will read very sexually explicit things, even though it is not targeted for them. I very vividly remember this, actually, from when I was like 15, 16. I very vividly remember a homeroom conversation I overheard a little bit, where two of my classmates were talking about reading 50 Shades of Grey. Keep in mind, we were like 15, 16, right? They were talking about reading 50 Shades of Grey, and one of them was like, okay, sure, I'm going to read it. And then the other one is like, the sexing starts in chapter 8. Like, and here's the other thing. Sometimes you will have an adult book placed with a young adult book. and it'll look like a young adult book anyway, like the cover. So you may not know what your other, like what the person, the teenager might be reading. You don't know if it's adult or young adult. And I just look, I think that this is also one of those things where I've said that, again, young adult is shifting. So we can always consider changing the category and make quote unquote young adults replace new adults with young adults, especially for the older, because really teenagers are not adults. So the fact that you're calling it young adult is like, for me, simplify. It just says that you're writing for a young adult, and teenagers are not young adults. Teenagers are teenagers. So if anything, you could, I really think the best solution is to shift YA, and instead of YA, make it shift, get rid of new adult and just take young adult, and then just keep certain things as teen, or just like for teenagers, and just make it like teen, and then from there, all the young adult books that are explicitly or sexually explicit could just be in that young adult category. But also, again, the other thing is that teenagers will gravitate toward them anyway. So I think it's okay for them to have that. I mean, one of the best young adult that I've read that shows sex in a very like a good light, and has children kind of, or has teenagers having actual sex, is The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. She does have at least one sex scene, and it doesn't feel strange. It feels like it perfectly fits, and it is a young adult novel. It can be done in young adult. Sex can be put in young adult. It's just the way that you do it. Now, the negative side is that you can run into the issue where you are sexualizing teenagers if you don't do it well. Now, if your young adult novel, if your character's like 18, 19, they're adults, so whatever. But if you're making them 16-year-olds, you could potentially be sexualizing said 16-year-olds. And I want to bring into these are not YA novels, but these do have 16-year-old or like teenage characters. I want to talk about two different things, a series and a novel. The series is Elite, and then the novel is what is that called? The Nevernight by J. Kristoff. So I do know that the character's like 16 in both. So in Elite, it is a show where I'm not even going to try to explain the premise, because actually I could try to explain the premise. It kind of devolves, but basically this girl gets murdered, and you're following, it's kind of like a thriller. The story is told in flashbacks and flash forwards as to how what happened in the past before she got murdered, and people figuring out a couple of other things and trying to solve the mystery. Now, that series is very sexually explicit. Now, it is marked as mature. However, while the actors are adults, the characters are teenagers. And I think that is one of those cases where you do run into that problem. You are sexualizing the teenage audience there, but like it does feel kind of odd there, truth be told. It feels a bit strange. A show made for adults having teenagers having sex does feel a bit weird. Then you have Nevernight by J. Kristoff. Now, Nevernight follows Mia, who is going to this school of assassins so she can learn to become an assassin in order to take revenge on the people that took her family. Great premise, right? Well, there is a very graphic sex scene in the book. And now this book is marked as adult again, but we have a 16-year-old very explicitly having sex with another guy who we actually don't know how old he is, but they do have very explicit sex on the page. Now, Moreci is talking about young adult being sexually explicit and how readers want these steamy stuff. I have not seen personally any readers asking for sex for young adults in a young adult novel. If anything, they probably would like for it not to be that way, and some of them are still are again, some of them are okay with young adult and treat it normally, while others are very dismissive of young adult. So it really depends on the camps of things. But like I said, Moreci is talking about the readers, but what she doesn't, I guess, mention, which I'm mentioning now, is that there are adult books that very much sexualize teenagers. There are adult stories, not just on TV, but again, people like, there's authors like J. Kristoff who did definitely sexualize their the teenager in their character. And I really mean a lot. Like, they're not even sexualized just because they have the sex scenes. Like, in the novel, there is a scene where a teenage girl gets a boob job done. And she is and like, even the woman around her kind of like the teacher who gets her to do this stuff sort of sexualizes her in a way. Like, it's like you're fine, like, but you're like, also like, she made her almost change a little bit just to make her pretty. It was very long. I don't remember everything, but I do know that the teenage character is sexualized. So you do run into that problem. However, I haven't seen this in young adult yet. So I feel like that's not really being asked for. And I consume a lot of booktube, and a lot of the reviewers I watch read and review young adult books. So I haven't seen that. Just so we're clear, not all YA needs to be sexually explicit, just like not all adult fiction needs to be sexually explicit. But I think there's a good middle ground, and I think that there are authors that can do it. Again, Naomi Novik in the Scholarman series, in The Final Graduate, did a really good job at making it at meeting that middle ground where it was explicit to a degree, but it's not explicit enough to be considered erotica. Like, it's not erotica. But basically, I don't see an issue with, at the very least, one explicit sex scene in a YA book. As long as it's done well, I think we should be fine. But then again, like I said, as I'm saying, YA is shifting. So if it ever changes to just go for new adult, it's okay. I also think this is a good time to bring up a fact that I heard in a podcast, and stuff like that. And it is that readers read up. So basically, if your reader is like 11, they might be reading about characters who are 13 or 14 or something. So while the young adult stories are written for characters 13 to 18, the readers who are reading those books may be reading with characters who are older than them. So even if you you replace new adult with young adult, there will still be readers who are teens and are still reading new adult because they follow older character. So either way, I don't think there's a good simple solution for this. Honestly, I really don't think there is. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. And because of this demand, a lot of publishing houses have bent the rules. How many young adult books have you read where it's very clear that the characters were aged down just to fit into the YA category, except literally none of the characters behave as teenagers in the slightest? And sometimes they don't even bother to age down the characters. The cast will be in their 20s just to appease the Karens and Jessicas of the world. Let teenagers enjoy YA. You can read it too, but it was made for them. They are entitled to books that accurately represent their experience. Okay, let's talk about a couple of things here. Not all of the YA characters, not all of the usually characters that are in their 20s, are more in like the new adults category, not as much in the young adult. Now I did read An Ember in the Ashes, where you do have at least 2 characters that are 20. I don't know what was the case there. It was marked as YA, but I don't know what was the point there. But that is a thing. And some of the things that she's talking about do fit something here. So there is the question where she asks, how many young adult books have you read where it's very clear that the characters were aged down just to fit into the YA category, except literally none of the characters behave as teenagers in the slightest. So there are 2 things I want to point out here. One, I have read a book just like that. I even reviewed it in this channel. I'll link below my Iron Widow review, because it was very clear that it was watered down. Like, it was like a watered down adult book where you totally where like Zhao basically took the characters and aged them down, because Zhao makes very clear in the acknowledgments that she was told that the book, that her agent or something told her that her first draft was a lot more problematic, as she says, and more and it was more graphic in areas, and it wouldn't translate to the young adult market. So she eventually rewrote this thing and then made it I guess young adult. But there are books that do that. Iron Widow, in my opinion, is one of them. Now, second thing to say is, she says here, and sometimes they don't even bother to age down the characters. The cast will be in their 20s just to appease the Karens and Jessica's world. Okay, so again, I read An Ember in the Ashes, and there are characters I think that are 20. So I don't, but that's it. That's like the only instance I have seen where that's a thing. There are definitely possibilities that that's a thing. I haven't seen many young adult books where you don't have a teen in the title. I don't see that. I don't really see that. So it says here to let teenagers enjoy YA. And it tells them they can read too, but it was made for them. They are entitled to books that accurately represent their experience. So now we're going to talk about that, because while she is right, teenagers should be represented of their experience. Again, I can't help but feel like there are moments in the post where she has dismissed teenagers. And there are some things in here that kind of make her point useless, because she has said things along the lines of like, why wouldn't they choose to be the chosen ones? And also along the line, like if they make mistakes in the story, why do they have to be terrible? Why does this have to happen? A lot of this stuff that she's saying about even the teenage characters that potentially would represent a teenager is dismissive. So her point, I think, doesn't hold very well. And again, the fact that also it feels very weird because it doesn't seem to fit with a lot of what she's been saying. Yes, teenagers should get their stuff represented, but it feels there are points where she feels dismissive about them. So I really don't know how much she believes it, which is why, for example, when I talked about sexually explicit YA, I didn't mind because this could potentially represent them in one way or another. I mean, they are exploring after all, and they do stuff. Another thing to note is she talks about how publishing, because of this demand, has bent the rules and stuff like that. Yes, I think that's true. However, again, yes, things have changed, but teenagers are different from what they were when you were growing up and when I was growing up. They're very different now. We need to accommodate the tastes of the readers, and as readers change, so should the genre and category in order to fit their expectations if you're specifically writing for an audience. So I actually think adult is changing a little bit too, in a way. So I think it's important to consider those things if you're specifically writing for an audience. I don't typically write for an audience. In mind, I will mark my books based on how I see them after I finish writing them, but I do not usually write for an audience. I think writing for an audience is an easy way for me to get writer's block. But like I said, young adult is changing. Perhaps the best way to do it is to get rid of new adult and replace it with young adult, and then just have teen as a genre, as a category, because that could fix some of the problems. It could fix some of the problems. Number 8, the sassy brat. Oh, I love a sassy brat. She's fun. Whether she's a teenager or an adult, having a sassy character is fun. It is so much fun. I love them. It's one of the reasons I was so into Aelin / Selena from Throne of Glass. Like, she is so sassy and she don't care about certain things. Like, I love a sassy brat. Sometimes you just need the sassy character. The sassy character is fun. And in YA, maybe teenagers aren't sassy, but then there's like a sassy character, and they're just like, yes, I love her. Because sometimes you at least in YA, it's one of the things I've read when it comes to sassy characters is it's a really interesting kind of character that doesn't always get I think a lot of love. I love my sassy characters, and some people don't like the sassy character. I love it because they're fun, but also, it's a character type. And it all depends. I'm curious what she has to say about that, because especially considering that I'm pretty sure she wrote if I remember correctly, she wrote Layla as a sassy character, and Layla was annoying, but not because she was sassy. But also there was a scene where she wrote Tobias to be sassy, and that was bad because he was never sassy before, so it was just really bad. But let's see what she has to say about the young adult sassy brat. Okay. I love a good sassafras. What is that word? But whenever I hear that the leading lady of a YA book is sassy, I'm instantly skeptical. This is solely because so many sassy teen heroines are actually just brats. Sass is boldness. It's being... Sass is boldness... Okay. It's being cheeky and spirited. It's not throwing tantrums and constantly complaining when things don't go... Oh my gosh. Okay, when things don't go your way. And listen, we all have our bad moments. I expect the main character to show their ass every once in a while. I do not expect them to be insufferable. Okay. Now, again, young adult is for teenagers. And again, teenage characters, when reviewing YA, sometimes get a lot of grief for being teenagers. They get a lot of grief for it from adult readers, I might add, because I've seen it. I mean, when there was this reviewer who disliked Cinderella is Dead, and one of the things that they said was that they didn't like how the how the main character got very angry at her, like, the one that she had a crush on, and somehow didn't understand that she wanted to do something, like she didn't want to change things, didn't want to do something different. But that's because that's a teenager. This is how teenagers act sometimes. They're the misunderstood character, but they also misunderstand other people. This is very normal for teenagers. So, yes, okay, let's look at this. So she does enjoy someone sassy, but when it comes to a YA novel, she's instantly skeptical because she says that it's because there are many sassy teen heroines that are actually just brats, and it's talking about how it's boldness, it's cheeky and spirited. Sometimes you can have that, but it's also, she says, it's not throwing a tantrums when things and constantly when things don't go your way. Now, listen, again, whether they complain or they don't, this is the way that teenagers might act. Complaining for them is a very normal thing. It's something that's, I think, normal in YA because it is normal among teenagers. So it makes sense to me that teenagers would complain and be more like brats when things don't go their way. It's normal. This is normal. What authors are writing when they're writing the sassy heroine is normal behavior for teenagers, in my opinion, from what I've seen. They're very emotional. And it makes sense that they're going to complain when things don't go their way. And there are teenagers who are sassy and very cheeky and just like spirited and stuff like that. But then there are the teenagers who are like that, but also will complain and do all that stuff. So it's one of those things. And honestly, Moreci shouldn't really be talking much here because she made a very sassy character, Layla, who always complains when things don't go her way. Always. And she's 20, and somehow she is not intelligent enough to even find allies. I have seen young adult characters be more intelligent than Layla in her books. So I'm having a hard time taking it seriously because I read her books. And this is not to say that Moreci shouldn't give this advice or mention that she doesn't like something, but sometimes you don't replicate the things that you want in your writing. And sometimes you can really give really good advice, but you won't be able to replicate that advice when you write. And that's something I have found when I was reading her book. So it's hard to like totally take her seriously when I've read the books. And that's my issue. I just find myself kind of like, it makes sense to me as a young adult reader why teenagers act the way that they do there. Especially because I took a developmental psych class. I don't remember everything, but I do remember some things. Authors, all I'm asking is for you to learn the difference between sassy and bratty. Sassy is the chick at the party cracking everyone up. Bratty is a little bitch. Okay, I don't think that was necessary. Bratty is someone who, again, like in her explanation, is someone who has complained a lot. But I don't think that was necessary. Sass can come, in my opinion, in many different ways, and sass can be, like she said, very spirited and bold. But sometimes boldness can also be shown in different ways. And I think, again, very dismissive of what teenagers might want to read, very dismissive of teenagers here, especially in this area. I don't know, I feel like I'm being repetitive with how dismissive she's being over teenagers here and there. So I don't know. I feel like I'm being slightly repetitive here, but it feels dismissive. It feels very dismissive in this case. So I don't know. What do you think? Okay, point number 9. Guys, we're almost done. Point number 9. The epic teen romance. I don't think teenage romances are as epic anymore, but I do think that YA is rampant with romance, and it's actually a trope I also don't like very much, the romance that needs to be in YA. There are certain things, but one of the things that seems to happen a lot, and I really mean a lot, in young adult is that there seems to always need to be a romance. Like in young adult fantasy, for some reason, there needs to always be a romance. There needs to always be like a love triangle. In general, there needs to be a romantic subplot. I don't always enjoy this. I would really just appreciate some friendships, or more friendships in young adult, especially friendships between male and female characters. For some reason, sometimes that is an issue where it's like they're a romantic partner instead of a friend, and it does become slightly annoying in that area. But I'm curious what she has to say about it herself. Those are my thoughts on the fact that there's a lot of romance in young adult. And I mean a lot. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be there. Like I read The Grace Year. I felt like the romance arc was just pointless, truth be told. This one's on the list solely because of my age. It's hard for me to believe, let alone get invested in an epic teen romance. I've been a teenager. I had boyfriends. Ain't nothing epic about it. It's just hard for me to sit there and think, yep, this would definitely happen. They're definitely gonna get married and spend eternity together. Okay. I can kind of understand that, but that's for me, I don't mind. I don't mind it for my age. There are a couple of YA romances I adore. I Wish You All the Best is one of the best romances I've read. Camp by Elsie Rosen. I Kissed Shara Wheeler. Like, these are teen romances that I have read that I've enjoyed. But I know it all depends, but like there is also the constant romantic subplots. Like I said. But I don't know. I read it, and I read YA romance, especially when it's good. I read it and I kind of think it's adorable. And even if you can't see it, I do think it's the teenage romance in that kind of stage is kind of cute and adorable. So I just enjoy reading it for that reason. I suspend my disbelief a little bit, and I think that's what it's calling for. And I know some people marry their high school sweethearts, but the rest of us do not find that romantic. If anything, that would be my worst nightmare. If I ended up married to my high school boyfriend, I would throw myself out a window. Wow. Why? Because 16-year-olds have bad judgment. We don't know how to pick them. And yes, a lot of teenagers fall in love, but the romance is only epic to them. So that's the point of a very epic of an epic teenage romance. It's not meant to be epic to you as the reader. It's meant to be epic to them, and it's meant to it's meant to be something that they find epic, right? The romance is supposed to be epic to them, whether you like it or not. Kind of works or doesn't, but it depends on the reader and what your sensibility is, I think, for this, because you can, at least I personally have a pretty good sensibility for YA, and again, I think it's cute. I think the romance is adorable, and this is one of those other tropes that I think is proving a point for me. It's a pattern I'm seeing in some of the tropes, and I will talk about that in a little bit. What now? I'll check later. Anyway, it is one of those tropes that is proving a point that I'm looking at the end of this, and it's very interesting. So yeah, and I think it all depends. It is supposed to be epic to the teenager. It's not meant to be epic to you as the adult reader. But if you are someone who reads, if you're an adult who reads young adult, chances are you might at least find it cute. If anything, you might find it cute when written well. For example, I did not find Meet Cute Diary by Emery Lee a good, compelling romance. I truly didn't. It made little sense to me, and it just didn't feel right. There are romances that are young adult that I don't find as compelling, but there are also a bunch of adult romance that I don't find very compelling. So, we fit both. We can get both categories in there. So I think that's the thing. It's one of those things that I find it depends on your sensibility when you read young adult. Okay. Oh my gosh, Brayden just shotgunned 5 Bush Lights at Jessica's party. Oh my god, Jaden just took me stargazing in the back of his truck and let me give him a hand job. Oh my god, Caden took me to the movies and I only had to pay for our popcorn, soda, and candy. So impressive. Okay. I think it's perfectly normal for people to enjoy YA romance. I just personally can't get into it because I'm a jaded adult who knows too much. Honestly, I think this is where YA shines, though. It's a great thing for escapism, and I think it's very much one of the reasons I personally like YA. It's more of an escapism from our adult lives and all the adulting and complicated things we need to do and all that stuff that we don't like. You know what I mean? So I think I think that's where YA shines as well. It puts us in the minds of fiction does it really well too, but YA is specifically like with teenage characters, so we get to see, oh my goodness, their issues rather than our own, and it's something that's actually kind of an interesting part of I think YA. So I think it's kind of an interesting it's an interesting thing to note when it comes to her. She specifically said she doesn't enjoy this trope because she's an adult, but I'm gonna make a case later. And this is part of the pattern that I've noticed. I'm going to make a case a little bit later, but first, we need to get to point number 10. Number 10, the Masquerade Ball. Honestly, the Masquerade Ball even made a turn in the made a splash in the adult books. Like I think 50 Shades of Grey had a Masquerade Ball, but I could be wrong. Some kind of masquerade thing. So although I will say I don't see the Masquerade Ball very often in YA literature anymore either, so I don't know if that trope is being phased out or if it's not as popular as it used to be. I'm not sure. Let's see what she has to say about it. I don't really have many thoughts on this one. Yeah, I said it. I don't know what it is about young adult and masquerade balls, but you guys love them. Those fancy masks get you all hot and bothered. What the hell? How is that supposed to happen? I don't hate this trope per se. It's just kind of boring. There are so many masquerade balls in YA, and they usually go the same way. The heroine dances with the hero. She is mesmerized by his eyes, which I promise have gold flecks in them. They always got them gold flecks. It's the law. And they almost kiss until some disturbance pulls them apart, usually a villainous disturbance. If this doesn't happen, the author might take the route where the characters don't recognize each other because of their masks. Masks that cover your cheekbones and nothing more. Of course, they dance, they fall in love, and then they get separated. However, will they learn the true identity of that mysterious stranger? It's not like they saw 75% of their fucking face, or heard their voice, or saw their figure. Those cheekbones get you... Those cheekbones get you every time, I swear. If someone wants to do a masquerade ball that unfolds differently, then cool. I'll be interested. Maybe. I don't know. Probably not. Okay, so this is the 10th point. And I will say, I think that the masquerade ball is not bad. I actually I don't read it as much on YA anymore, but I think the reason it might be used is because it makes for an interesting plot device to keep the love interests apart. Kind of like miscommunication is a convenient plot device to keep love interests apart, especially in adult romance. I'm holding a grudge. I've read so much miscommunication. I'm just like, It's just, yeah. It's just no. I just get really annoyed. Just no. But I think that the masquerade, again, depends on the reader. I really don't know. I really don't know where the I don't know where to begin here. I don't know what points I can give, because it's not a very interesting trope, and it's not boring, but it's also not bad. It just happens to be a thing. And I think that trope was, in more older YA. I saw it in, I think the last time I saw this post, this trope being followed, but slightly differently though. It ended up a little bit differently though, was in Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. Although I would argue that might be more adult, but I could be wrong. I gotta reread it because that was a good damn story. That was a damn good story. And now I have A Night of Cake and Puppets. Yeah, I need to read it. But anyway, the point is, yes, I think the masquerade is kind of an interesting thing. It makes for an easy way to get all the characters together, for the villain to show up and ruin things. So it's one of those things I just find interesting. So I will be back for final thoughts in a moment. I need to do something, but I'll be back for final thoughts, and I will let you know what I think. And I'm hoping I can give my thoughts on, in general, young adults, and my thoughts on the category, my thoughts on the tropes that were given, and anything else I want to say, because this is an interesting conversation, I think, when looking at them. So yeah. Okay, so here are my final thoughts. First of all, I don't know how long this video is going to be, but I hope it at least gave you an idea of some of my thoughts. But here are some of my final thoughts. When I was reading these tropes, there are a couple of patterns I noticed, and I'm going to talk about my favorite for last, but there are the two main patterns I noticed. The first one is that the tropes that she's talking about are very much, some of them are alive, but others not as much. Some of them, specifically the first three, focus more on Twilight than anything else. Like older YA. Like, I feel like these are things that Twilight made a little bit more popular than what they were. Also, there are like mixes of like tropes and other things. There's like a mixture of tropes and other things. And also, the other thing I note is that there are some parts of her list that could have just been one instead of multiple. Like the parts about the Chosen One and the first 2 points about, like, points 4 and 5, which are related to the Chosen One. And then points 1 and 2, which are related to the, like, ancient teenager, plus the I forgot what the first point was, but those two were related in areas. So I find myself like, it is, when you read it, I think when I read it, I think it's a little bit disappointing because I watch the videos all the time. I watch her videos for some writing advice over specific things I might be interested in, but also I just like to see what her points are. And I find myself looking at this, and I think that some of the quote unquote tropes are not always tropes. Like, she described a kind of reader, and to a point a kind of author that she doesn't like, and just other things that just feel more cliche than a trope. And I'm okay to a point with that. So the second pattern I noticed in the list is what she wants is what originally YA would not represent, and it is realism. And I don't mean realism for teenagers. I mean realism for the adult reader, which is actually something she doesn't seem to fully believe, as stated, I think, in point number 7, where she says that teenagers deserve books that represent their experience. But a lot of the tropes that she has issues with, and I mean a lot of them, not the ones that make sense, but the ones that I think I argued against very, very very vehemently, like the Chosen Ones and stuff like that, are very realistic things, or what she might think are realistic things that could happen in an adult novel. So if you are it seems like she wants a specific kind of realism in young adult. And originally though, young adult was for a teen audience, but like I said, young adult is shifting to accommodate other people, and it's no longer just for teens, and there are people who find themselves reading young adult who are not teens. And that I don't think that there's anything wrong with the young adult that is now. I think there are still things that need to be like looked into and stuff like that. But the pattern I have noticed that she does want some kind of realism that stories for teenagers just don't have. It's kind of like she expects the teenagers to relate more like act more like adults in certain areas than teenagers. And that's the thing. I feel like she wants some of the, like, the way this comes off to me in the pattern I have seen in the list is that she seems to want more things that she can find, again, in more adult fiction than she probably won't find in young adult fiction. And she expects them to behave kind of like adults more than the teenage characters that they are. So that is the pattern I've noticed. I wonder if you've noticed this. Let me know if this is just me and if you have not noticed this at all. But this is like the pattern I have personally noticed. And I find it kind of interesting in that area, because yes, there are things I probably don't, I know that I don't fully like in YA. Like, I don't like that everything is a romance in YA, or a lot of it is a romance. But I don't have a problem with the young adult romance and the idea that they're going to marry their high school sweetheart, or the idea of love triangles, or a bunch of different things, right? I don't have an issue with those, because I have a bit more of a sensibility when reading YA. I understand when I'm reading YA some of the things I'm going to be expecting. And so that is kind of what I go for. But a lot of the things that I'm looking at in this list feel like, besides that she wants some kind of, what I guess, realism, and for teenagers to act almost more like adults than what the teenagers or even the characters in that area are meant to be acting like. Another thing I've noticed, I think in some, not all of the tropes, I think at least one of them, is the idea of making young adult like it used to be, which I will say, I really miss older YA from like the early 2000s. Specifically, I remember, like, that is what I started reading. I read a series called Blue Ford High, I think is what it was called. And it was a book about, it was a series that was following these specific teenagers in this neighborhood. They did a couple of, and they followed their different stories and what it was like for them, and it was a very interesting series. I'll probably actually reread that series so that I can actually review it in the channel. I would like to talk about this series. I think it's an interesting series to talk about, and I think it is. I will say that I miss it, but I also think that YA has evolved to be more inclusive of the reading tastes of, well, its readers. It's not just for teens anymore. There does need to be, I agree that there does need to be a category of books that is specifically for teens. And for a time, I will say, I thought, and I definitely believed, that young adult has become a little bit more corrupted with some of the things that they have put in young adult, specifically more adult more things that you would find in the adult category. However, I no longer think that's the case. Upon reflection, I think that young adult is simply evolving into both what the readers want, and in certain areas the issues that teenagers face as well. Because the issues that teenagers face in like the early 2000s or even the 2010s are definitely going to be different than the issues that teenagers face now in 2020s. So I think it's important to acknowledge that when we're looking at young adults. There does definitely need to be a genre that just says teen, or a category that just says teen. Young adult, the older young adult, I will say the high young adult, or lower young adult, and higher young adult. Higher young adult does feel more like new adult. So maybe there is something that can be done with that, because new adult is barely a thing anymore, I think. Like, I remember new adult was like really big at some point, but now it seems to be like barely mentioned. If anything, the higher YA feels more like new adult, and I think that's okay. I think the shifting landscapes does give young adult literature a chance to continue to improve and be good. I think it's one of those things. I think young adult as a category is a fantastic genre, and I think it's a fantastic category, not genre. And I think it's perfectly okay the way it's changing. It feels like young adult is in a transition and it hasn't finished completing it. I think there will be more improvements, and there will probably be more of a separation between the young adult and the and then more new adult stuff, or like the more adult stuff eventually. But at the end of the day, there is something to be said about young adult just trying to, publishers and even authors trying to fit the tastes of their readers. If anything, older young adult will probably be what, you know, more like what I read, if anything. But also it will be something that teenagers could potentially read. I think it's a shift because things are changing, and I think it's okay. I think categories and genres need to evolve as their readers do, and that is perfectly acceptable. Let me know what you think in the comments. I know I don't feel like I had a full conversation on my thoughts on young adult all the time. Like in general, I feel like I had a good enough conversation, but I think I left it open for a conversation with you. Let me know what you think about young adult as it is, and how you feel about the current landscape of young adult as a category. Honestly, I think that the fact that it's evolving is interesting, and I want to see where it goes. I'm weirdly excited for it. So I want to see where it goes. I think young adult is one of those genres or one of those categories that just knows to, I think, evolve well with the readers. And so does adult, because adult is now including other things that you would probably find more in young, would have found in young adult. And I think that's okay. The crossover is not too bad. I will say I probably would not like erotica being translated to teenagers, but that's why we have the older young adult, which is kind of more like new adult. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section. I would love to talk with you about this stuff. I think it's really interesting. Okay, you guys, we're done. If you made it through this entire long video, congratulations. You've basically watched a movie, and I hope you enjoyed it. I think I explained myself very well on that last clip with final thoughts, but I do have other final thoughts, and it was just one. So I talked about the pattern I noticed and the amount of realism that Moreci would probably want in YA, and I also forgot to mention though that I wanted to make a case for something, and in order to do this, I reread the post again on her blog, and this, I want to make the case that these tropes or like these things that she does not like in young adult come from someone who really doesn't engage with the young adult genre, so like doesn't read it. And this is my thought on this for a few reasons. Well, one, to a degree, there are some parts of the blog post that feel dismissive to what teenagers may like to read, and in general just feel dismissive to the category in certain ways. It just feels like it doesn't feel entirely like someone who reads it, who maybe understands the category as a reader, not even as an author, just as a reader. Like, this doesn't feel like someone who understands it as a reader. And I think you can see that through the posts, like the way it talks. And I'm not talking about the sarcasm that she uses. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the way that it feels slightly dismissive to certain areas, and the way that it just doesn't seem to understand the category. For example, like the first like 3 tropes are all older YA kind of tropes. Like, these are not tropes that you will find very much anymore, at least not regarding like 16-year-olds. Like, very rarely, I have not seen it again at something similar to Twilight, like when it comes to young adult, where like a 16-year-old is currently in love with like a 109-year-old man. I don't see that anymore. That was a thing that was popular because of Twilight, like that with the Twilight boom, that was a thing that was, you know, popular, but it isn't anymore. And when that happens, instead, now the character's a little bit older. They're like 18 or 19. So like consider things like Throne of Glass, A Court of Thorns and Roses, Crescent City, Blood and Ash, Flesh and Fire, the Fall of Ruin and Wrath as well. These are like the main two authors I can think of. I'm sure there are others I just haven't read. So like those are the ones like that are now in that, but those are adult. Those are not young adult. Those are adult. Well, Throne of Glass is supposed to be young adult, and I think it started that way until it got to the 5th book where it was no longer just it was no longer a young adult book by the time we got to the 5th book. Yeah. But I think till then that was the thing. The other thing the other thing that makes me feel like she doesn't understand it is that I don't think she really reads this genre. She has stated before in her videos that she doesn't read young adult, that she reads adult books. And I think that when you don't read young adult, I think that if you haven't engaged with it, my thought is that you don't fully understand it at all. Maybe you understand it as an author. Maybe you understand it, but as in that area. But I don't. And like the whole young adult is supposed to be for teens. It's this audience or whatever. Like maybe you understand it like that. But I think that as a reader, if you don't read young adult, then I don't think you have a full understanding of young adult, if that makes sense. So I think it's one of those things. So it's hard to take what she says, very, very seriously sometimes. There are some things I will agree with her on, perhaps, and I have tried to be, in this video, I have tried to be the person kind of like to try to agree with as best as I can. But I think there are moments where I just have a hard time agreeing with her because I am a young adult reader, and I feel like I have a really good understanding of the category. Maybe I will write in this category eventually, but I feel like I have a good understanding of it, and I feel that because I have a good understanding of it, I can speak on it at least from my experience. But if you don't engage in it, it's hard to, I think, for me specifically, to take what you have to say at face value. I think there are some things, but I think that for the most part, I would take anything in this list with like a spoonful of salt because of how everything is portrayed. So those are kind of like my final thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I'm very curious as to what your thoughts on Moreci's trope list is, as well as what she has to say. Please do me a favor, though, if you comment, please do not say any disparaging things about her. As I said, I think at the beginning of the video, I am very much familiar with her content, and I like her personality. There are things I will disagree with her on, and stuff like that. I join her live sprints. I've asked questions in her writing sprints, which I think have been very useful to me. Things like for example, I asked about pen names and romance and also Ingram Spark. So I think that she can give some good information. So I am familiar with her content, and I watch it, and I enjoy it, and I like her personality and sarcasm. I do. But all that said, I will disagree with, I think, a couple different things, right? So we can all have disagreements and still like them. But do me a favor, when you comment, please keep your opinions based on the content. Don't say anything disparaging about her. If I find anything disparaging in the comments about her, I will delete that comment and I will block you. I do not want any kind of hate going toward her in my comment section. The only reason I did this video was so that I could have a conversation on a category of reading that I enjoy. But I did not do it to be disparaging to the person in that has this opinion. That's not good. Okay, so please do that, but also let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Once again, I would like to remind you, I mentioned this somewhere mid video, and I've also mentioned the beginning, but I'm going to mention it here. Bookshare is currently running a fundraiser where they are raising money. They're raising $200,000 to help them with, if I remember correctly, I will put in the link, but in the pinned comment. I'll put it in the pinned comment. I was planning to put it in the description, but I'll put it in the pinned comment, that way it's more visible. But it's supposed to be to help, I think, children in India get access to, like, you know, Bookshare, as well as like their training. I think like 20 schools or whatever, and everything what they need for, so that Bookshare expands to them as well. Bookshare is an organization that has done a lot for me, and I'm just bringing out the word. So if you can support, or at least share the link, I'd really appreciate it. And with that, consider subscribing to my channel. If you enjoy the content. My book is almost out. It is release month. December 26, 2023, Daughter of Death will be available. But if you would like to get it beforehand, all the links will be in the description. It is available in ebook and audiobook format. Thank you so much for your consideration. Also, you can go to my website and subscribe to my blog, which I'm getting back into. So go and do that. And if you're interested in the process of like the Rightful Bride, for example, I am currently releasing first draft chapters in the blog. So if you want to read that, definitely go to my blog. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and until next time, consume stories. Bye.